Chapter 51 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 51. Officer. Meanwhile, the cardinal looked anxiously for news from England, but no news arrived that was not annoying and threatening. Although La Rochelle was invested, however certain success might appear, thanks to the precautions taken and above all to the dike, which prevented the entrance of any vessel into the besieged city, the blockade might last a long time yet. This was a great affront to the king's army, and a great inconvenience to the cardinal, who had no longer, it is true, to embroil Louis XIII with Anne of Austria, for that affair was over. But he had to adjust matters for Monsieur de Bassompierre, who was embroiled with the Duke d'Angoulême. As to Monsieur, who had begun the siege, he left to the cardinal the task of finishing it. The city, notwithstanding the incredible perseverance of its mayor, had attempted a sort of mutiny for a surrender. The mayor had hanged the mutineers. This execution quieted the ill-disposed, who resolved to allow themselves to die of hunger, this death always appearing to them more slow and less sure than strangulation. On their side, from time to time, the besiegers took the messengers which the Rochellais sent to Buckingham, or the spies which Buckingham sent to the Rochellais. In one case or the other, the trial was soon over. The cardinal pronounced the single word, "Hanged." The king was invited to come and see the hanging. He came languidly, placing himself in a good situation to see all the details. This amused him sometimes a little, and made him endure the siege with patience, but it did not prevent his getting very tired, or from talking at every moment of returning to Paris, so that if the messengers and the spies had failed, His Eminence, notwithstanding all his inventiveness, would have found himself much embarrassed. Nevertheless, time passed on, and the Rochellais did not surrender. The last spy that was taken was the bearer of a letter. This letter told Buckingham that the city was at an extremity, but instead of adding, "If your succour does not arrive within 15 days, we will surrender," it added quite simply, "If your succour comes not within 15 days, we shall all be dead with hunger when it comes." The Rochellais, then, had no hope but in Buckingham. Buckingham was their Messiah. It was evident that if they one day learned positively that they must not count on Buckingham, their courage would fail with their hope. The cardinal looked then with great impatience for the news from England which would announce to him that Buckingham would not come. The question of carrying the city by assault, though often debated in the council of the king, had always been rejected. In the first place, La Rochelle appeared impregnable. Then the cardinal, whatever he said, very well knew that the horror of bloodshed in this encounter, in which Frenchmen would combat against Frenchmen, was a retrograde movement of 60 years impressed upon his policy, and the cardinal was at that period what we now call a man of progress. In fact, the sack of La Rochelle and the assassination of 3 of 4,000 Huguenots who allowed themselves to be killed would resemble too closely, in 1628, the massacre of St. Bartholomew in 1572, and then, above all this extreme measure, which was not at all repugnant to the king, good Catholic as he was, always fell before this argument of the besieging generals: La Rochelle is impregnable, except to famine. The cardinal could not drive from his mind the fear he entertained of his terrible emissary, for he comprehended the strange qualities of this woman, sometimes a serpent, sometimes a lion. Had she betrayed him? Was she dead? He knew her well enough in all cases to know that, whether acting for or against him, as a friend or an enemy, she would not remain motionless without great impediments. But whence did these impediments arise? That was what he could not know. And yet he reckoned, and with reason, on Milady. He had divined in the past of this woman terrible things which his red mantle alone could cover, and he felt, from one cause or another, that this woman was his own, as she could look to no other but himself for a support superior to the danger which threatened her. He resolved then to carry on the war alone, and to look for no success foreign to himself, but as we look for a fortunate chance. He continued to press the raising of the famous dyke which was to starve La Rochelle. Meanwhile he cast his eyes over that unfortunate city, which contained so much deep misery and so many heroic virtues, and recalling the saying of Louis XI, his political predecessor, as he himself was the predecessor of Robespierre, he repeated this maxim of Tristan's gossip: divide in order to reign. Henry IV, when besieging Paris, had loaves and provisions thrown over the walls. The cardinal had little notes thrown over in which he represented to the Rochellais how unjust, selfish, and barbarous was the conduct of their leaders. These leaders had corn in abundance, and would not let them partake of it. They adopted as a maxim, for they too had maxims, that it was of very little consequence that women, children, and old men should die, so long as the men who were to defend the walls remained strong and healthy. Up to that time, whether from devotedness or from want of power to act against it, this maxim, without being generally adopted, nevertheless passed from theory into practice. But the notes did it injury. The notes reminded the men that the children, women, and old men whom they allowed to die were their sons, their wives, and their fathers, and that it would be more just for everyone to be reduced to the common misery, in order that equal conditions should give birth to unanimous resolutions. These notes had all the effect that he who wrote them could expect, in that they induced a great number of the inhabitants to open private negotiations with the royal army. But at the moment when the cardinal saw his means already bearing fruit, and applauded himself for having put it in action, an inhabitant of La Rochelle who had contrived to pass the royal lines, God knows how, such was the watchfulness of Bassompierre, Schomberg, and the Duc d'Angoulême, themselves watched over by the cardinal. An inhabitant of La Rochelle, we say, entered the city, coming from Portsmouth, and saying that he had seen a magnificent fleet ready to sail within 8 days. Still further, Buckingham announced to the mayor that at length the great league was about to declare itself against France, and that the kingdom would be at once invaded by the English, Imperial, and Spanish armies. This letter was read publicly in all parts of the city. Copies were put up at the corners of the streets, and even they who had begun to open negotiations interrupted them, being resolved to await the succour so pompously announced. This unexpected circumstance brought back Richelieu's former anxiety, and forced him, in spite of himself, once more to turn his eyes to the other side of the sea. During this time, exempt from the anxiety of its only and true chief, the royal army led a joyous life, neither provisions nor money being wanting in the camp. All the corps rivaled one another in audacity and gaiety. To take spies and hang them, to make hazardous expeditions upon the dyke or the sea, to imagine wild plans, and to execute them coolly, such were the pastimes which made the army find these days short, which were not only so long to the Rochellais, a prey to famine and anxiety, but even to the cardinal, who blockaded them so closely. Sometimes when the cardinal, always on horseback, like the lowest gendarme of the army, cast a pensive glance over those works, so slowly keeping pace with his wishes, which the engineers, brought from all the corners of France, were executing under his orders, if he met a musketeer of the company of Tréville, he drew near and looked at him in a peculiar manner, and not recognizing in him one of our 4 companions, he turned his penetrating look and profound thoughts in another direction. One day, when oppressed with a mortal weariness of mind, without hope in the negotiations with the city, without news from England, the cardinal went out, without any other aim than to be out of doors, and accompanied only by Cahusac and La Houdinière, strolled along the beach. Mingling the immensity of his dreams with the immensity of the ocean, he came, his horse going at a foot's pace, to a hill from the top of which he perceived behind a hedge, reclining on the sand and catching in its passage one of those rays of the sun so rare at this period of the year, 7 men surrounded by empty bottles. 4 of these men were our Musketeers, preparing to listen to a letter one of them had just received. This letter was so important that it made them forsake their cards and their dice on the drumhead. The other 3 were occupied in opening an enormous flagon of collicure wine. These were the lackeys of these gentlemen. The cardinal was, as we have said, in very low spirits, and nothing when he was in that state of mind increased his depression so much as gaiety in others. Besides, he had another strange fancy, which was always to believe that the causes of his sadness created the gaiety of others. Making a sign to La Houdinière and Cahusac to stop, he alighted from his horse and went toward the suspected merry companions, hoping, by means of the sand which deadened the sound of his steps and of the hedge which concealed his approach, to catch some words of this conversation which appeared so interesting. At 10 paces from the hedge he recognized the talkative Gascon, and as he had already perceived that these men were Musketeers, he did not doubt that the 3 others were those called the Inseparables, that is to say, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. It may be supposed that his desire to hear the conversation was augmented by this discovery. His eyes took a strange expression, and with the step of a tiger cat he advanced toward the hedge. But he had not been able to catch more than a few vague syllables without any positive sense, when a sonorous and short cry made him start, and attracted the attention of the Musketeers. "Officer!" cried Grimaud. "You are speaking, you scoundrel!" said Athos, rising upon his elbow and transfixing Grimaud with his flaming look. Grimaud therefore added nothing to his speech, but contented himself with pointing his index finger in the direction of the hedge, announcing by this gesture the cardinal and his escort. With a single bound the Musketeers were on their feet, and saluted with respect. The cardinal seemed furious. "It appears that messieurs the Musketeers keep guard," said he. "Are the English expected by land, or do the Musketeers consider themselves superior officers?" "Monseigneur," replied Athos, for amid the general fright he alone had preserved the noble calmness and coolness that never forsook him. "Monseigneur, the Musketeers, when they are not on duty, or when their duty is over, drink and play at dice, and they are certainly superior officers to their lackeys." "Lackeys," grumbled the cardinal. "Lackeys who have the order to warn their masters when anyone passes are not lackeys. They are sentinels." "Your Eminence may perceive that if we had not taken this precaution, we should have been exposed to allowing you to pass without presenting you our respects, or offering you our thanks for the favour you have done us in uniting us. D'Artagnan," continued Athos, "you, who but lately were so anxious for such an opportunity for expressing your gratitude to Monseigneur, here it is. Avail yourself of it." These words were pronounced with that imperturbable phlegm which distinguished Athos in the hour of danger, and with that excessive politeness which made of him, at certain moments, a king more majestic than kings by birth. D'Artagnan came forward and stammered out a few words of gratitude, which soon expired under the gloomy looks of the cardinal. "It does not signify, gentlemen," continued the cardinal, without appearing to be in the least swerved from his first intention by the diversion which Athos had started. "It does not signify, gentlemen. I do not like to have simple soldiers, because they have the advantage of serving in a privileged corps, thus to play the great lords. Discipline is the same for them as for everybody else." Athos allowed the cardinal to finish his sentence completely, and bowed in sign of assent. Then he resumed in his turn. "Discipline, monseigneur, has, I hope, in no way been forgotten by us. We are not on duty, and we believed that not being on duty, we were at liberty to dispose of our time as we pleased. If we are so fortunate as to have some particular duty to perform for your Eminence, we are ready to obey you. Your Eminence may perceive," continued Athos, knitting his brow, for this sort of investigation began to annoy him, "that we have not come out without our arms." And he showed the cardinal with his finger the 4 muskets piled near the drum, on which were the cards and dice. "Your Eminence may believe," added D'Artagnan, "that we would have come to meet you, if we could have supposed it was Monseigneur coming toward us with so few attendants." The cardinal bit his moustache and even his lips a little. "Do you know what you look like, altogether, as you are armed and guarded by your lackeys?" said the cardinal. "You look like 4 conspirators." "Oh, as to that, monseigneur, it is true," said Athos. "We do conspire, as your Eminence might have seen the other morning. Only we conspire against the Rochelle." "Ah, you gentlemen of policy," replied the cardinal, knitting his brow in his turn. "The secret of many unknown things might perhaps be found in your brains, if we could read them as you read that letter which you concealed as soon as you saw me coming." The colour mounted to the face of Athos, and he made a step toward his Eminence. "One might think you really suspected us, monseigneur, and we were undergoing a real interrogatory. If it be so, we trust your Eminence will deign to explain yourself, and we should then at least be acquainted with our real position." "And if it were an interrogatory," replied the cardinal, "others besides you have undergone such, Monsieur Athos, and have replied thereto. Thus I have told your Eminence that you had but to question us, and we are ready to reply. What was that letter you were about to read, Monsieur Aramis, and which you so promptly concealed?" "A woman's letter, monseigneur." "Ah, yes, I see," said the cardinal. "We must be discreet with this sort of letters. But nevertheless we may show them to a confessor, and you know I have taken orders." "Monseigneur," said Athos, with a calmness the more terrible because he risked his head in making this reply, "the letter is a woman's letter, but it is neither signed Marion de Lorme nor Madame d'Aiguillon." The cardinal became pale as death. Lightning darted from his eyes. He turned round as if to give an order to Cahusac and Houdinière. Athos saw the movement. He made a step toward the muskets, upon which the other 3 friends had fixed their eyes, like men ill disposed to allow themselves to be taken. The cardinalists were 3. The Musketeers, lackeys included, were 7. He judged that the match would be so much the less equal if Athos and his companions were really plotting, and by one of those rapid turns which he always had at command, all his anger faded away into a smile. "Well, well," said he, "you are brave young men, proud in daylight, faithful in darkness. We can find no fault with you for watching over yourselves, when you watch so carefully over others. Gentlemen, I have not forgotten the night in which you served me as an escort to the Red Dovecot. If there were any danger to be apprehended on the road I am going, I would request you to accompany me. But as there is none, remain where you are. Finish your bottles, your game, and your letter. Adieu, gentlemen." And remounting his horse, which Cahusac led to him, he saluted them with his hand and rode away. The 4 young men, standing and motionless, followed him with their eyes without speaking a single word until he had disappeared. Then they looked at one another. The countenances of all gave evidence of terror, for notwithstanding the friendly adieu of his Eminence, they plainly perceived that the cardinal went away with rage in his heart. Athos alone smiled, with a self-possessed, disdainful smile. When the cardinal was out of hearing and sight, "That Grimaud kept bad watch," cried Porthos, who had a great inclination to vent his ill humour on somebody. Grimaud was about to reply to excuse himself. Athos lifted his finger, and Grimaud was silent. "Would you have given up the letter, Aramis?" said D'Artagnan. "I," said Aramis in his most flute-like tone, I had made up my mind. If he had insisted upon the letter being given up to him, I would have presented the letter to him with one hand, and with the other I would have run my sword through his body." "I expected as much," said Athos, "and that was why I threw myself between you and him. Indeed, this man is very much to blame for talking thus to other men. One would say he had never had to do with any but women and children." "My dear Athos, I admire you, but nevertheless we were in the wrong, after all." "How in the wrong?" said Athos. "Whose, then, is the air we breathe? Whose is the ocean upon which we look? Whose is the sand upon which we were reclining? Whose is that letter of your mistress? Do these belong to the cardinal? Upon my honour, this man fancies the world belongs to him. There you stood, stammering, stupefied, annihilated. One might have supposed the Bastille appeared before you, and that the gigantic Medusa had converted you into stone. Is being in love conspiring? You are in love with a woman whom the cardinal has caused to be shut up, and you wish to get her out of the hands of the cardinal. That's a match you are playing with his eminence. This letter is your game. Why should you expose your game to your adversary? That is never done. Let him find it out if he can. We can find out his." "Well, that's all very sensible, Athos," said D'Artagnan. "In that case, let there be no more question of what's past, and let Aramis resume the letter from his cousin where the cardinal interrupted him." Aramis drew the letter from his pocket. The three friends surrounded him, and the three lackeys grouped themselves again near the wine jar. "You had only read a line or two," said D'Artagnan. "Read the letter again from the commencement." "Willingly," said Aramis. "My dear cousin, I think I shall make up my mind to set out for Bethune, where my sister has placed our little servant in the convent of the Carmelites. This poor child is quite resigned, as she knows she cannot live elsewhere without the salvation of her soul being in danger. Nevertheless, if the affairs of our family are arranged, as we hope they will be, I believe she will run the risk of being damned, and will return to those she regrets, particularly as she knows they are always thinking of her. Meanwhile, she is not very wretched. What she most desires is a letter from her intended. I know that such viands pass with difficulty through convent gratings, but after all, as I have given you proofs, my dear cousin, I am not unskilled in such affairs, and I will take charge of the commission. My sister thanks you for your good and eternal remembrance. She has experienced much anxiety, but she is now at length a little reassured, having sent her secretary away in order that nothing may happen unexpectedly. Adieu, my dear cousin. Tell us news of yourself as often as you can, that is to say, as often as you can with safety. I embrace you. Marie Michon. "Oh, what do I not owe you, Aramis?" said D'Artagnan. "Dear Constance, I have at length, then, intelligence of you. She lives, she is in safety in a convent. She is at Bethune. Where is Bethune, Athos?" "Why, upon the frontiers of Artois and of Flanders. The siege once over, we shall be able to make a tour in that direction." "And that will not be long, it is to be hoped," said Porthos. "For they have this morning hanged a spy who confessed that the Rochellais were reduced to the leather of their shoes. Supposing that having eaten the leather they eat the soles, I cannot see much that is left unless they eat one another." "Poor fools," said Athos, emptying a glass of excellent Bordeaux wine which, without having at that period the reputation it now enjoys, merited it no less. "Poor fools. As if the Catholic religion were not the most advantageous and the most agreeable of all religions. All the same," resumed he, after having clicked his tongue against his palate, "they are brave fellows. But what the devil are you about, Aramis?" continued Athos. "Why, you are squeezing that letter into your pocket." "Yes," said D'Artagnan, "Athos is right. It must be burned. And yet, if we burn it, who knows whether Monsieur Cardinal has not a secret to interrogate ashes?" "He must have one," said Athos. "What will you do with the letter, then?" asked Porthos. "Come here, Grimaud," said Athos. Grimaud rose and obeyed. "As a punishment for having spoken without permission, my friend, you will please to eat this piece of paper. Then, to recompense you for the service you will have rendered us, you shall afterward drink this glass of wine. First, here is the letter. Eat heartily." Grimaud smiled, and with his eyes fixed upon the glass which Athos held in his hand, he ground the paper well between his teeth, and then swallowed it. "Bravo, Monsieur Grimaud," said Athos. "And now take this. That's well. We dispense with your saying grace." Grimaud silently swallowed the glass of Bordeaux wine, but his eyes, raised toward heaven during this delicious occupation, spoke a language which, though mute, was not the less expressive. "And now," said Athos, "unless Monsieur Cardinal should form the ingenious idea of ripping up Grimaud, I think we may be pretty much at our ease respecting the letter." Meantime, his Eminence continued his melancholy ride, murmuring between his moustaches, "These 4 men must positively be mine." End of chapter. Chapter 52 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 52. Captivity, the First Day. Let us return to Milady, whom a glance thrown upon the coast of France has made us lose sight of for an instant. We shall find her still in the despairing attitude in which we left her, plunged in an abyss of dismal reflection, a dark hell at the gate of which she has almost left hope behind, because for the first time she doubts, for the first time she fears. On 2 occasions her fortune has failed her, on 2 occasions she has found herself discovered and betrayed, and on these 2 occasions it was to one fatal genius, sent doubtlessly by the Lord to combat her, that she has succumbed. D'Artagnan has conquered her, that invincible power of evil. He has deceived her in her love, humbled her in her pride, thwarted her in her ambition, and now he ruins her fortune, deprives her of liberty, and even threatens her life. Still more, he has lifted the corner of her mask, that shield with which she covered herself and which rendered her so strong. D'Artagnan has turned aside from Buckingham, whom she hates as she hates every one she has loved, the tempest with which Richelieu threatened him in the person of the Queen. D'Artagnan had passed himself upon her as De Wardes, for whom she had conceived one of those tiger-like fancies common to women of her character. D'Artagnan knows that terrible secret which he has sworn no one shall know without dying. In short, at the moment in which he has just obtained from Richelieu a carte blanche, by the means of which he is about to take vengeance on her enemy, this precious paper is torn from her hands, and it is D'Artagnan who holds her prisoner and is about to send her to some filthy Botany Bay, some infamous Tyburn of the Indian Ocean. All this she owes to D'Artagnan without doubt, from whom can come so many disgraces heaped upon her head, if not from him. He alone could have transmitted to Lord de Winter all these frightful secrets which he has discovered, one after another, by a train of fatalities. He knows her brother-in-law. He must have written to him. What hatred she distills! Motionless, with her burning and fixed glances, in her solitary apartment, how well the outbursts of passion which at times escape from the depths of her chest with her respiration accompany the sound of the surf which rises, growls, roars, and breaks itself like an eternal and powerless despair against the rocks on which is built this dark and lofty castle. How many magnificent projects of vengeance she conceives by the light of the flashes which her tempestuous passion casts over her mind against Madame Bonacieux, against Buckingham, but above all against D'Artagnan, projects lost in the distance of the future. Yes, but in order to avenge herself she must be free, and to be free a prisoner has to pierce a wall, detach bars, cut through a floor, all undertakings which a patient and strong man may accomplish, but before which the feverish irritations of a woman must give way. Besides, to do all this, time is necessary, months, years, and she has 10 or 12 days, as Lord de Winter, her fraternal and terrible jailer, has told her. And yet, if she were a man, she would attempt all this, and perhaps might succeed. Why then did Heaven make the mistake of placing that man-like soul in that frail and delicate body? The first moments of her captivity were terrible. A few convulsions of rage which she could not suppress paid her debt of feminine weakness to nature. But by degrees she overcame the outbursts of her mad passion, and nervous tremblings which agitated her frame disappeared, and she remained folded within herself like a fatigued serpent in repose. Go to, go to! I must have been mad to allow myself to be carried away so, says she, gazing into the glass, which reflects back to her eyes the burning glance by which she appears to interrogate herself. No violence. Violence is the proof of weakness. In the first place, I have never succeeded by that means. Perhaps if I employed my strength against women, I might perchance find them weaker than myself, and consequently conquer them. But it is with men that I struggle, and I am but a woman to them. Let me fight like a woman, then. My strength is in my weakness. Then, as if to render an account to herself of the changes she could place upon her countenance, so mobile and so expressive, she made it take all expressions from that of passionate anger, which convulsed her features, to that of the most sweet, most affectionate, and most seducing smile. Then her hair assumed successively, under her skilful hands, all the undulations she thought might assist the charms of her face. At length she murmured, satisfied with herself, "Come, nothing is lost. I am still beautiful." It was then nearly 8 o'clock in the evening. Milady perceived a bed. She calculated that the repose of a few hours would not only refresh her head and her ideas, but still further, her complexion. A better idea, however, came into her mind before going to bed. She had heard something said about supper. She had already been an hour in this apartment. They could not long delay bringing her a repast. The prisoner did not wish to lose time, and she resolved to make that very evening some attempts to ascertain the nature of the ground she had to work upon, by studying the characters of the men to whose guardianship she was committed. A light appeared under the door. This light announced the reappearance of her jailers. Milady, who had arisen, threw herself quickly into the armchair, her head thrown back, her beautiful hair unbound and dishevelled, her bosom half bare beneath her crumpled lace, one hand on her heart and the other hanging down. The bolts were drawn. The door groaned upon its hinges. Steps sounded in the chamber and drew near. "Place that table there," said a voice which the prisoner recognised as that of Felton. The order was executed. "You will bring lights and relieve the sentinel," continued Felton. And this double order which the young lieutenant gave to the same individuals proved to Milady that her servants were the same men as her guards, that is to say, soldiers. Felton's orders were, for the rest, executed with a silent rapidity that gave a good idea of the way in which he maintained discipline. At length Felton, who had not yet looked at Milady, turned toward her. Ah," said he, "she is asleep, that's well. When she wakes she can sup." And he made some steps toward the door. "But, my lieutenant," said a soldier less stoical than his chief, and who had approached Milady, "this lady is not asleep." "What, not asleep?" said Felton. What is she doing, then? Her face is very pale, and I have listened in vain. I do not hear her breathe." "You are right," said Felton, after having looked at Milady from the spot on which he stood without moving a step toward her. "Go and tell Lord de Winter that his prisoner has fainted. For this event not having been foreseen, I don't know what to do." The soldier went out to obey the orders of his officer. Felton sat down upon an armchair which happened to be near the door, and waited without speaking a word, without making a gesture. Milady possessed that great art, so much studied by women, of looking through her long eyelashes without appearing to open the lids. She perceived Felton, who sat with his back toward her. She continued to look at him for nearly 10 minutes, and in these 10 minutes the immovable guardian never turned round once. She then thought that Lord de Winter would come, and by his presence give fresh strength to her jailer. Her first trial was lost. She acted like a woman who reckons up her resources. As a result, she raised her head, opened her eyes, and sighed deeply. At this sigh, Felton turned round. "Ah, you are awake, madam," he said. "Then I have nothing more to do here. If you want anything, you can ring."
"Oh, my God, how I have suffered!" said Milady in that harmonious voice which, like that of the ancient enchantresses, charmed all whom she wished to destroy. And she assumed, upon sitting up in the armchair, a still more graceful and abandoned position than when she reclined. Felton arose. "You will be served, madam, 3 times a day," said he. "In the morning at 9 o'clock, in the day at 1 o'clock, and in the evening at 8. If that does not suit you, you can point out what other hours you prefer, and in this respect your wishes will be complied with." "But am I to remain always alone in this vast and dismal chamber?" asked Milady.
"A woman of the neighbourhood has been sent for, who will be tomorrow at the castle, and will return as often as you desire her presence."
"I thank you, sir,"
replied the prisoner humbly. Felton made a slight bow and directed his steps toward the door. At the moment he was about to go out, Lord de Winter appeared in the corridor, followed by the soldier who had been sent to inform him of the swoon of Milady. He held a vial of salts in his hand. "Well, what is it? What is going on here?" said he, in a jeering voice, on seeing the prisoner sitting up and Felton about to go out. "Is this corpse come to life already? Felton, my lad, did you not perceive that you were taken for a novice, and that the first act was being performed of a comedy of which we shall doubtless have the pleasure of following out all the developments?" "I thought so, my lord," said Felton. "But as the prisoner is a woman, after all, I wish to pay her the attention that every man of gentle birth owes to a woman, if not on her account, at least on my own." Milady shuddered through her whole system. These words of Felton's passed like ice through her veins. "So," replied de Winter, laughing, "that beautiful hair so skilfully dishevelled, that white skin, and that languishing look, have not yet seduced you, you heart of stone?" "No, my lord," replied the impassive young man. "Your lordship may be assured that it requires more than the tricks and coquetry of a woman to corrupt me. In that case, my brave lieutenant, let us leave Milady to find out something else, and go to supper. But be easy. She has a fruitful imagination, and the second act of the comedy will not delay its steps after the first." And at these words Lord de Winter passed his arm through that of Felton and led him out, laughing.
"Oh, I will be a match for you," murmured Milady between her teeth. "Be assured of that, you poor spoiled monk, you poor converted soldier, who has cut his uniform out of a monk's frock."
"By the way," resumed de Winter, stopping at the threshold of the door, "you must not, Milady, let this check take away your appetite. Taste that fowl and those fish. On my honour, they are not poisoned. I have a very good cook, and he is not to be my heir. I have full and perfect confidence in him. Do as I do. Adieu, dear sister, till your next swoon." This was all that Milady could endure. Her hands clutched her armchair, she ground her teeth inwardly, her eyes followed the motion of the door as it closed behind Lord de Winter and Felton, and the moment she was alone a fresh fit of despair seized her. She cast her eyes upon the table, saw the glittering of a knife, rushed toward it and clutched it. But her disappointment was cruel. The blade was round and of flexible silver. A burst of laughter resounded from the other side of the ill-closed door, and the door reopened. "Ha, ha, ha!" cried Lord de Winter. "Ha, ha! Don't you see, my brave Felton? Don't you see what I told you? That knife was for you, my lad. She would have killed you. Observe, this is one of her peculiarities, to get rid thus, after one fashion or another, of all the people who bother her. If I had listened to you, the knife would have been pointed and of steel. Then no more of Felton, she would have cut your throat, and after that everybody else's. See, John, see how well she knows how to handle a knife." In fact, Milady still held the harmless weapon in her clenched hand. But these last words, this supreme insult, relaxed her hands, her strength, and even her will. The knife fell to the ground. "You were right, my lord," said Felton, with a tone of profound disgust which sounded to the very bottom of the heart of Milady. "You were right, my lord, and I was wrong." And both again left the room. But this time Milady lent a more attentive ear than the first, and she heard their steps die away in the distance of the corridor. "I am lost," murmured she. "I am lost. I am in the power of men upon whom I can have no more influence than upon statues of bronze or granite. They know me by heart, and are steeled against all my weapons. It is, however, impossible that this should end as they have decreed." In fact, as this last reflection indicated, this instinctive return to hope, sentiments of weakness or fear did not dwell long in her ardent spirit. Milady sat down to table, ate from several dishes, drank a little Spanish wine, and felt all her resolution return. Before she went to bed she had pondered, analysed, turned on all sides, examined on all points, the words, the steps, the gestures, the signs, and even the silence of her interlocutors. And of this profound, skilful, and anxious study the result was that Felton, everything considered, appeared the more vulnerable of her two persecutors. One expression above all recurred to the mind of the prisoner. "If I had listened to you," Lord de Winter had said to Felton. Felton, then, had spoken in her favour, since Lord de Winter had not been willing to listen to him. "Weak or strong," repeated Milady, "that man has, then, a spark of pity in his soul. Of that spark I will make a flame that shall devour him. As to the other, he knows me, he fears me, and knows what he has to expect of me if ever I escape from his hands. It is useless, then, to attempt anything with him. But Felton, that's another thing. He is a young, ingenuous, pure man, who seems virtuous. Him there are means of destroying." And Milady went to bed and fell asleep with a smile upon her lips. Anyone who had seen her sleeping might have said she was a young girl dreaming of the crown of flowers she was to wear on her brow at the next festival. End of chapter. Chapter 53 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 53. Captivity, the Second Day. Milady dreamed that she at length had D'Artagnan in her power, that she was present at his execution, and it was the sight of his odious blood flowing beneath the axe of the headsman which spread that charming smile upon her lips. She slept as a prisoner sleeps, rocked by his first hope. In the morning, when they entered her chamber, she was still in bed. Felton remained in the corridor. He brought with him the woman of whom he had spoken the evening before, and who had just arrived. This woman entered, and approaching Milady's bed, offered her services. Milady was habitually pale. Her complexion might therefore deceive a person who saw her for the first time. "I am in a fever," said she. "I have not slept a single instant during all this long night. I suffer horribly. Are you likely to be more humane to me than others were yesterday? All I ask is permission to remain abed." "Would you like to have a physician called?" said the woman. Felton listened to this dialogue without speaking a word. Milady reflected that the more people she had around her, the more she would have to work upon, and Lord de Winter would redouble his watch. Besides, the physician might declare the ailment feigned, and Milady, after having lost the first trick, was not willing to lose the second. "Go and fetch a physician," said she. "What could be the good of that? These gentlemen declared yesterday that my illness was a comedy. It would be just the same today, no doubt, for since yesterday evening they have had plenty of time to send for a doctor." "Then," said Felton, who became impatient, "say yourself, madam, what treatment you wish followed." How can I tell? My God! I know that I suffer, that's all. Give me anything you like, it is of little consequence." "Go and fetch Lord de Winter," said Felton, tired of these eternal complaints. "Oh, no, no!" cried Milady. "No, sir, do not call him, I conjure you. I am well, I want nothing, do not call him." She gave so much vehemence, such magnetic eloquence to this exclamation, that Felton, in spite of himself, advanced some steps into the room. "He has come," thought Milady. "Meanwhile, madam, if you really suffer," said Felton, "a physician shall be sent for, and if you deceive us, well, it will be the worse for you. But at least we shall not have to reproach ourselves with anything." Milady made no reply, but turning her beautiful head round upon the pillow, she burst into tears and uttered heartbreaking sobs. Felton surveyed her for an instant with his usual impassiveness. Then, seeing that the crisis threatened to be prolonged, he went out. The woman followed him, and Lord de Winter did not appear. "I fancy I begin to see my way," murmured Milady with a savage joy, burying herself under the clothes to conceal from anybody who might be watching her this burst of inward satisfaction. 2 hours passed away. "Now it is time that the malady should be over," said she. "Let me rise and obtain some success this very day. I have but 10 days, and this evening 2 of them will be gone." In the morning, when they entered Milady's chamber, they had brought her breakfast. Now, she thought, they could not long delay coming to clear the table, and that Felton would then reappear. Milady was not deceived. Felton reappeared, and without observing whether Milady had or had not touched her repast, made a sign that the table should be carried out of the room, it having been brought in ready spread. Felton remained behind. He held a book in his hand. Milady, reclining in an armchair near the chimney, beautiful, pale, and resigned, looked like a holy virgin awaiting martyrdom. Felton approached her and said, "Lord de Winter, who is a Catholic like yourself, madam, thinking that the deprivation of the rites and ceremonies of your church might be painful to you, has consented that you should read every day the ordinary of your mass, and here is a book which contains the ritual." At the manner in which Felton laid the book upon the little table near which Milady was sitting, at the tone in which he pronounced the 2 words, "your mass," at the disdainful smile with which he accompanied them, Milady raised her head and looked more attentively at the officer. By that plain arrangement of the hair, by that costume of extreme simplicity, by the brow polished like marble and as hard and impenetrable, she recognized one of those gloomy Puritans she had so often met, not only in the court of King James, but in that of the King of France, where, in spite of the remembrance of the St. Bartholomew, they sometimes came to seek refuge. She then had one of those sudden inspirations which only people of genius receive in great crises, in supreme moments which are to decide their fortunes or their lives. Those two words, "your mass," and a simple glance cast upon Felton, revealed to her all the importance of the reply she was about to make, but with that rapidity of intelligence which was peculiar to her, this reply, already arranged, presented itself to her lips. "I," said she, with an accent of disdain in unison with that which she had remarked in the voice of the young officer, "I, sir, my mass! Lord de Winter, the corrupted Catholic, knows very well that I am not of his religion, and this is a snare he wishes to lay for me." "And of what religion are you, then, madam?" asked Felton, with an astonishment which, in spite of the empire he held over himself, he could not entirely conceal. "I will tell it," cried Milady, with a feigned exultation, "on the day when I shall have suffered sufficiently for my faith." The look of Felton revealed to Milady the full extent of the space she had opened for herself by this single word. The young officer, however, remained mute and motionless. His look alone had spoken. "I am in the hands of my enemies," continued she, with that tone of enthusiasm which she knew was familiar to the Puritans. "Well, let my God save me, or let me perish for my God. That is the reply I beg you to make to Lord de Winter. And as to this book," added she, pointing to the manual with her finger, but without touching it, as if she must be contaminated by it, "you may carry it back and make use of it yourself, for doubtless you are doubly the accomplice of Lord de Winter, the accomplice in his persecutions, the accomplice in his heresies." Felton made no reply, took the book with the same appearance of repugnance which he had before manifested, and retired pensively. Lord de Winter came toward 5 o'clock in the evening. Milady had had time, during the whole day, to trace her plan of conduct. She received him like a woman who had already recovered all her advantages. "It appears," said the Baron, seating himself in the armchair opposite to that occupied by Milady, and stretching out his legs carelessly upon the hearth, "it appears we have made a little apostasy." "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean to say that since we last met you have changed your religion. You have not by chance married a Protestant for the third husband, have you?" "Explain yourself, my lord," replied the prisoner with majesty, "for though I hear your words, I declare I do not understand them." "Then you have no religion at all. I like that best," replied Lord de Winter, laughing. "Certainly that is most in accord with your own principles," replied Milady frigidly. "Oh, I confess it is all the same to me." "Oh, you need not avow this religious indifference, my lord. Your debaucheries and crimes would vouch for it." "What, you talk of debaucheries, Madame Messalina, Lady Macbeth? Either I misunderstand you, or you are very shameless." "You only speak thus because you are overheard," coolly replied Milady, "and you wish to interest your jailers and your hangman against me." "My jailers and my hangman! Heyday, madam! You are taking a poetical tone, and the comedy of yesterday turns to a tragedy this evening. As to the rest, in 8 days you will be where you ought to be, and my task will be completed." "Infamous task! Impious task!" cried Milady, with the exultation of a victim who provokes his judge. "My word," said de Winter, rising, "I think the hussy is going mad. Come, come, calm yourself, Madam Puritan, or I'll remove you to a dungeon. It's my Spanish wine that has got into your head, is it not? But never mind. That sort of intoxication is not dangerous, and will have no bad effects." And Lord de Winter retired swearing, which at that period was a very knightly habit. Felton was indeed behind the door, and had not lost one word of this scene. Milady had guessed aright. "Yes, go, go," said she to her brother. "The effects are drawing near, on the contrary. But you, weak fool, will not see them until it is too late to shun them." Silence was re-established. 2 hours passed away. Milady's supper was brought in, and she was found deeply engaged in saying her prayers aloud, prayers which she had learned of an old servant of her second husband, a most austere Puritan. She appeared to be in ecstasy, and did not pay the least attention to what was going on around her. Felton made a sign that she should not be disturbed, and when all was arranged, he went out quietly with the soldiers. Milady knew she might be watched, so she continued her prayers to the end, and it appeared to her that the soldier who was on duty at her door did not march with the same step and seemed to listen. For the moment she wished nothing better. She arose, came to the table, ate but little, and drank only water. An hour after, her table was cleared, but Milady remarked that this time Felton did not accompany the soldiers. He feared then to see her too often. She turned toward the wall to smile, for there was in this smile such an expression of triumph that this smile alone would have betrayed her. She allowed, therefore, half an hour to pass away, and as at that moment all was silence in the old castle, as nothing was heard but the eternal murmur of the waves, that immense breaking of the ocean, with her pure, harmonious, and powerful voice, she began the first couplet of the psalm then in great favour with the Puritans.
Thou leavest thy servants, Lord, to see if they be strong, but soon thou dost afford thy hand to lead them on.
These verses were not excellent, very far from it, but as it is well known, the Puritans did not pique themselves upon their poetry. While singing, Milady listened. The soldier on guard at her door stopped, as if he had been changed into stone. Milady was then able to judge of the effect she had produced. Then she continued her singing with inexpressible fervour and feeling. It appeared to her that the sounds spread to a distance beneath the vaulted roofs, and carried with them a magic charm to soften the hearts of her jailers. It, however, likewise appeared that the soldier on duty, a zealous Catholic, no doubt, shook off the charm, for through the door he called, "Hold your tongue, madam! Your song is as dismal as a De Profundis, and if besides the pleasure of being in garrison here, we must hear such things as these, no mortal can hold out." "Silence!" then exclaimed another stern voice which Milady recognized as that of Felton. "What are you meddling with, stupid? Did anybody order you to prevent that woman from singing? No! You were told to guard her, to fire at her if she attempted to fly. Guard her! If she flies, kill her, but don't exceed your orders." An expression of unspeakable joy lightened the countenance of Milady, but this expression was fleeting as the reflection of lightning. Without appearing to have heard the dialogue, of which she had not lost a word, she began again, giving to her voice all the charm, all the power, all the seduction the demon had bestowed upon it.
For all my tears, my cares, my exile and my chains, I have my youth, my prayers, and God who counts my pains.
Her voice, of immense power and sublime expression, gave to the rude, unpolished poetry of these psalms a magic and an effect which the most exalted Puritans rarely found in the songs of their brethren, and which they were forced to ornament with all the resources of their imagination. Felton believed he heard the singing of the angel who consoled the 3 Hebrews in the furnace. Milady continued,
One day our doors will ope, with God come our desire, and if betrays that hope, to death we can aspire.
This verse, into which the terrible enchantress threw her whole soul, completed the trouble which had seized the heart of the young officer. He opened the door quickly, and Milady saw him appear, pale as usual, but with his eye inflamed and almost wild. "Why do you sing thus, and with such a voice?" said he.
"Your pardon, sir," said Milady, with mildness. "I forgot that my songs are out of place in this castle. I have perhaps offended you in your creed, but it was without wishing to do so, I swear. Pardon me, then, a fault which is perhaps great, but which certainly was involuntary." Milady was so beautiful at this moment, the religious ecstasy in which she appeared to be plunged gave such an expression to her countenance, that Felton was so dazzled that he fancied he beheld the angel whom he had only just before heard. "Yes, yes," said he, "you disturb, you agitate the people who live in the castle." The poor, senseless young man was not aware of the incoherence of his words, while Milady was reading with her lynx's eyes the very depths of his heart. "I will be silent, then," said Milady, casting down her eyes with all the sweetness she could give to her voice, with all the resignation she could impress upon her manner. "No, no, madam," said Felton. "Only do not sing so loud, particularly at night." And at these words Felton, feeling that he could not long maintain his severity toward his prisoner, rushed out of the room. "You have done right, Lieutenant," said the soldier. "Such songs disturb the mind, and yet we become accustomed to them. Her voice is so beautiful." End of chapter. Chapter 54 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 54. Captivity, the Third Day. Felton had fallen, but there was still another step to be taken. He must be retained, or rather he must be left quite alone, and Milady but obscurely perceived the means which could lead to this result. Still more must be done. He must be made to speak, in order that he might be spoken to, for Milady very well knew that her greatest seduction was in her voice, which so skilfully ran over the whole gamut of tones from human speech to language celestial. Yet in spite of all this seduction Milady might fail, for Felton was forewarned, and that against the least chance. From that moment she watched all his actions, all his words, from the simplest glance of his eyes to his gestures, even to a breath which could be interpreted as a sigh. In short, she studied everything, as a skilful comedian does to whom a new part has been assigned in a line to which he is not accustomed. Face to face with Lord de Winter, her plan of conduct was more easy. She had laid that down the preceding evening. To remain silent and dignified in his presence, from time to time to irritate him by affected disdain, by a contemptuous word, to provoke him to threats and violence which would produce a contrast with her own resignation. Such was her plan. Felton would see all. Perhaps he would say nothing, but he would see. In the morning Felton came as usual, but Milady allowed him to preside over all the preparations for breakfast without addressing a word to him. At the moment when he was about to retire, she was cheered with a ray of hope, for she thought he was about to speak, but his lips moved without any sound leaving his mouth, and making a powerful effort to control himself, he sent back to his heart the words that were about to escape from his lips, and went out. Toward midday, Lord de Winter entered. It was a tolerably fine winter's day, and a ray of that pale English sun which lights but does not warm
came through the bars of her prison. Milady was looking out at the window and pretended not to hear the door as it opened. "Ah, ah," said Lord de Winter. "After having played comedy, after having played tragedy, we are now playing melancholy?" The prisoner made no reply. "Yes, yes," continued Lord de Winter, "I understand. You would like very well to be at liberty on that beach. You would like very well to be in a good ship dancing upon the waves of that emerald green sea. You would like very well, either on land or on the ocean, to lay for me one of those nice little ambuscades you are so skillful in planning. Patience, patience. In 4 days' time the shore will be beneath your feet, the sea will be open to you, more open than will perhaps be agreeable to you, for in 4 days England will be relieved of you." Milady folded her hands, and raising her fine eyes toward heaven, "Lord, Lord," said she, with an angelic meekness of gesture and tone, "pardon this man as I myself pardon him." "Yes, pray, accursed woman," cried the baron. "Your prayer is so much the more generous from your being, I swear to you, in the power of a man who will never pardon you." And he went out. At the moment he went out, a piercing glance darted through the opening of the nearly closed door, and she perceived Felton, who drew quickly to one side to prevent being seen by her. Then she threw herself upon her knees and began to pray. my God," said she, "thou knowest in what holy cause I suffer. Give me, then, strength to suffer." The door opened gently. The beautiful supplicant pretended not to hear the noise, and in a voice broken by tears she continued, "God of vengeance, God of goodness, wilt thou allow the frightful projects of this man to be accomplished?" Then only she pretended to hear the sound of Felton's steps, and rising quick as thought, she blushed, as if ashamed of being surprised on her knees. "I do not like to disturb those who pray, madam," said Felton seriously. "Do not disturb yourself on my account, I beseech you." "How do you know I was praying, sir?" said Milady, in a voice broken by sobs. "You were deceived, sir. I was not praying." "Do you think, then, madam," replied Felton in the same serious voice, but with a milder tone, "do you think I assume the right of preventing a creature from prostrating herself before her Creator? God forbid! Besides, repentance becomes the guilty, whatever crimes they may have committed. For me, the guilty are sacred at the feet of God." "Guilty? I?" said Milady, with a smile which might have disarmed the angel of the Last Judgment. "Guilty? Oh, my God, thou knowest whether I am guilty. Say I am condemned, sir, if you please, but you know that God, who loves martyrs, sometimes permits the innocent to be condemned." "Were you condemned, were you innocent, were you a martyr," replied Felton, "the greater would be the necessity for prayer, and I myself would aid you with my prayers." "Oh, you are a just man!" cried Milady, throwing herself at his feet. "I can hold out no longer, for I fear I shall be wanting in strength at the moment when I shall be forced to undergo the struggle and confess my faith. Listen, then, to the supplication of a despairing woman. You are abused, sir, but that is not the question. I only ask you one favour, and if you grant it me, I will bless you in this world and in the next." "Speak to the master, madam," said Felton. "Happily, I am neither charged with the power of pardoning nor punishing. It is upon one higher placed than I am that God has laid this responsibility." "To you, no, to you alone. Listen to me. Rather than add to my destruction, rather than add to my ignominy." "If you have merited this shame, madam, if you have incurred this ignominy, you must submit it as an offering to God." "What do you say? Oh, you do not understand me. When I speak of ignominy,
You think I speak of some chastisement, of imprisonment or death. Would to heaven! Of what consequence to me is imprisonment or death?
It is I who no longer understand you, madam, said Felton.
Or rather, who pretend not to understand me, sir, replied the prisoner with a smile of incredulity.
No, madam, on the honour of a soldier, on the faith of a Christian.
What? You are ignorant of Lord de Winter's designs upon me?
I am.
Impossible. You are his confidant.
I never lie, madam.
Oh, he conceals them too little for you not to divine them.
I seek to divine nothing, madam. I wait till I am confided in, and apart from that which Lord de Winter has said to me before you, he has confided nothing to me.
Why, then, cried Milady, with an incredible tone of truthfulness, you are not his accomplice. You do not know that he destines me to a disgrace which all the punishments of the world cannot equal in horror?
You are deceived, madam, said Felton, blushing. Lord de Winter is not capable of such a crime.
Good, said Milady to herself. Without thinking what it is, he calls it a crime. Then aloud, the friend of that wretch is capable of everything.
Whom do you call that wretch? asked Felton.
Are there, then, in England 2 men to whom such an epithet can be applied?
You mean George Villiers? asked Felton, whose looks became excited.
Whom pagans and unbelieving Gentiles call Duke of Buckingham, replied Milady. I could not have thought that there was an Englishman in all England who would have required so long an explanation to make him understand of whom I am speaking.
The hand of the Lord is stretched over him, said Felton. He will not escape the chastisement he deserves. Felton only expressed, with regard to the Duke, the feeling of execration which all the English had declared toward him whom the Catholics themselves called the extortioner, the pillager, the debauchee, and whom the Puritans styled simply Satan.
"Oh, my God! My God!" cried Milady. "When I supplicate thee to pour upon this man the chastisement which is his due, thou knowest it is not my own vengeance I pursue, but the deliverance of a whole nation that I implore."
"Do you know him, then?" asked Felton.
"At length he interrogates me," said Milady to herself, at the height of joy at having obtained so quickly such a great result. "Oh, know him! Yes, yes, to my misfortune, to my eternal misfortune!" And Milady twisted her arms as if in a paroxysm of grief.
Felton no doubt felt within himself that his strength was abandoning him, and he made several steps toward the door, but the prisoner, whose eye never left him, sprang in pursuit of him and stopped him.
"Sir," cried she, "be kind, be clement, listen to my prayer. That knife, which the fatal prudence of the baron deprived me of, because he knows the use I would make of it. Oh, hear me to the end! That knife, give it to me for a minute only, for mercy's, for pity's sake. I will embrace your knees. You shall shut the door that you may be certain I contemplate no injury to you. My God, to you, the only just, good, and compassionate being I have met with. To you, my preserver, perhaps. 1 minute that knife, 1 minute, a single minute, and I will restore it to you through the grating of the door. Only 1 minute, Mr. Felton, and you will have saved my honour."
"To kill yourself?" cried Felton, with terror, forgetting to withdraw his hands from the hands of the prisoner. "To kill yourself?"
"I have told, sir," murmured Milady, lowering her voice, and allowing herself to sink overpowered to the ground. "I have told my secret. He knows all. My God, I am lost."
Felton remained standing, motionless and undecided.
"He still doubts," thought Milady. "I have not been earnest enough." Someone was heard in the corridor. Milady recognized the step of Lord de Winter. Felton recognized it also, and made a step toward the door.
Milady sprang toward him.
"Oh, not a word," said she in a concentrated voice. "Not a word of all that I have said to you to this man, or I am lost, and it would be you.
Then, as the steps drew near, she became silent for fear of being heard, applying, with a gesture of infinite terror, her beautiful hand to Felton's mouth. Felton gently repulsed Milady, and she sank into a chair. Lord de Winter passed before the door without stopping, and they heard the noise of his footsteps soon die away. Felton, as pale as death, remained some instants with his ear bent and listening. Then, when the sound was quite extinct, he breathed like a man awaking from a dream, and rushed out of the apartment. "Ah!" said Milady, listening in her turn to the noise of Felton's steps, which withdrew in a direction opposite to those of Lord de Winter. "At length you are mine." Then her brow darkened. "If he tells the Baron," said she, "I am lost, for the Baron, who knows very well that I shall not kill myself, will place me before him with a knife in my hand, and he will discover that all this despair is but acted." She placed herself before the glass, and regarded herself attentively. Never had she appeared more beautiful. "Oh, yes," said she, smiling, "but we won't tell him." In the evening Lord de Winter accompanied the supper. "Sir," said Milady, "is your presence an indispensable accessory of my captivity? Could you not spare me the increase of torture which your visits cause me?" "How, dear sister?" said Lord de Winter. "Did you not sentimentally inform me with that pretty mouth of yours, so cruel to me today, that you came to England solely for the pleasure of seeing me at your ease, an enjoyment of which you told me so sensibly felt the deprivation that you had risked everything for it? Sea-sickness, tempest, captivity? Well, here I am, be satisfied. Besides, this time my visit has a motive." Milady trembled. She thought Felton had told all. Perhaps never in her life had this woman, who had experienced so many opposite and powerful emotions, felt her heart beat so violently. She was seated. Lord de Winter took a chair, drew it toward her, and sat down close beside her. Then, taking a paper out of his pocket, he unfolded it slowly. "Here," said he, "I want to show you the kind of passport which I have drawn up, and which will serve you henceforward as the rule of order in the life I consent to leave you." Then, turning his eyes from Milady to the paper, he read: "Order to conduct—" "The name is blank," interrupted Lord de Winter. "If you have any preference, you can point it out to me, and if it be not within 1,000 leagues of London, attention will be paid to your wishes. I will begin again, then. Order to conduct to the person named Charlotte Backson, branded by the justice of the kingdom of France, but liberated after chastisement. She is to dwell in this place without ever going more than 3 leagues from it. In case of any attempt to escape, the penalty of death is to be applied. She will receive 5 shillings per day for lodging and food." "That order does not concern me," replied Milady, coldly, "since it bears another name than mine." "A name? Have you a name, then?" "I bear that of your brother." "Ay, but you are mistaken. My brother is only your second husband, and your first is still living. Tell me his name, and I will put it in the place of the name of Charlotte Backson." "No, you will not? You are silent? Well, then you must be registered as Charlotte Backson." Milady remained silent, only this time it was no longer from affectation, but from terror. She believed the order ready for execution. She thought that Lord de Winter had hastened her departure. She thought she was condemned to set off that very evening. Everything in her mind was lost for an instant, when all at once she perceived that no signature was attached to the order. The joy she felt at this discovery was so great she could not conceal it. "Yes, yes," said Lord de Winter, who perceived what was passing in her mind. "Yes, you looked for the signature. And you say to yourself, all is not lost, for that order is not signed. It is only shown to me to terrify me, that's all. You are mistaken. Tomorrow this order will be sent to the Duke of Buckingham. The day after tomorrow it will return signed by his hand and marked with his seal, and 24 hours afterward I will answer for its being carried into execution. Adieu, madam. That is all I had to say to you.
And I reply to you, sir, that this abuse of power, this exile under a fictitious name, are infamous.
Would you like better to be hanged in your true name, Milady? You know that the English laws are inexorable on the abuse of marriage. Speak freely. Although my name, or rather that of my brother, would be mixed up with the affair, I will risk the scandal of a public trial to make myself certain of getting rid of you.
Milady made no reply, but became as pale as a corpse.
Oh, I see you prefer peregrination. That's well, madam, and there is an old proverb that says, travelling trains youth. My faith, you are not wrong after all, and life is sweet. That's the reason why I take such care you shall not deprive me of mine. There only remains, then, the question of the 5 shillings to be settled. You think me rather parsimonious, don't you? That's because I don't care to leave you the means of corrupting your jailers. Besides, you will always have your charms left to seduce them with. Employ them if your check with regard to Felton has not disgusted you with attempts of that kind.
Felton has not told him, said Milady to herself. Nothing is lost, then.
And now, madam, till I see you again. Tomorrow I will come and announce to you the departure of my messenger.
Lord de Winter rose, saluted her ironically, and went out. Milady breathed again. She had still 4 days before her. 4 days would quite suffice to complete the seduction of Felton. A terrible idea, however, rushed into her mind. She thought that Lord de Winter would perhaps send Felton himself to get the order signed by the Duke of Buckingham. In that case Felton would escape her, for in order to secure success, the magic of a continuous seduction was necessary. Nevertheless, as we have said, one circumstance reassured her. Felton had not spoken. As she would not appear to be agitated by the threats of Lord de Winter, she placed herself at the table and ate. Then, as she had done the evening before, she fell on her knees and repeated her prayers aloud. As on the evening before, the soldier stopped his march to listen to her. Soon after, she heard lighter steps than those of the sentinel, which came from the end of the corridor and stopped before her door. "It is he," said she, and she began the same religious chant which had so strongly excited Felton the evening before. But although her voice, sweet, full, and sonorous, vibrated as harmoniously and as affectingly as ever, the door remained shut. It appeared, however, to Milady that in one of the furtive glances she darted from time to time at the grating of the door, she thought she saw the ardent eyes of the young man through the narrow opening. And whether this was reality or vision, he had this time sufficient self-command not to enter. However, a few instants after she had finished her religious song, Milady thought she heard a profound sigh. Then the same steps she had heard approach slowly withdrew, as if with regret. End of chapter. Chapter 55 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 55. Captivity, the Fourth Day. The next day, when Felton entered Milady's apartment, he found her standing, mounted upon a chair, holding in her hands a cord made by means of torn cambric handkerchiefs, twisted into a kind of rope one with another and tied at the ends.
At the noise Felton made in entering, Milady leaped lightly to the ground and tried to conceal behind her the improvised cord she held in her hand. The young man was more pale than usual, and his eyes, reddened by want of sleep, denoted that he had passed a feverish night. Nevertheless, his brow was armed with a severity more austere than ever. He advanced slowly toward Milady, who had seated herself, and taking an end of the murderous rope which, by neglect, or perhaps by design, she allowed to be seen, "What is this, madam?" he asked coldly.
"That? Nothing,"
said Milady, smiling with that painful expression which she knew so well how to give to her smile.
"Ennui is the mortal enemy of prisoners. I had ennui, and I amused myself with twisting that rope."
Felton turned his eyes toward the part of the wall of the apartment before which he had found Milady standing in the armchair in which he was now seated, and over her head he perceived a gilt-headed screw, fixed in the wall for the purpose of hanging up clothes or weapons. He started, and the prisoner saw that start, for though her eyes were cast down, nothing escaped her. "What were you doing on that armchair?" asked he.
"Of what consequence?" replied Milady.
"But," replied Felton, "I wish to know."
"Do not question me," said the prisoner. "You know that we who are true Christians are forbidden to lie."
"Well, then," said Felton, "I will tell you what you were doing, or rather what you meant to do. You were going to complete the fatal project you cherish in your mind. Remember, madam, if our God forbids falsehood, he much more severely condemns suicide."
"When God sees one of his creatures persecuted unjustly, placed between suicide and dishonor, believe me, sir," replied Milady in a tone of deep conviction, "God pardons suicide, for then suicide becomes martyrdom."
"You say either too much or too little. Speak, madam. In the name of heaven, explain yourself."
"That I may relate my misfortunes for you to treat them as fables, that I may tell you my projects for you to go and betray them to my persecutor? No, sir. Besides, of what importance to you is the life or death of a condemned wretch? You are only responsible for my body, is it not so? And provided you provide a carcass that may be recognized as mine, they will require no more of you. Nay, perhaps you will even have a double reward."
"I, madam, I?" cried Felton. "You suppose that I would ever accept the price of your life? Oh, you cannot believe what you say."
"Let me act as I please, Felton. Let me act as I please," said Milady, elated. "Every soldier must be ambitious, must he not? You are a lieutenant? Well, you will follow me to the grave with the rank of captain."
"What have I then done to you?" said Felton, much agitated, "that you should load me with such a responsibility before God and before men? In a few days you will be away from this place. Your life, madam, will then no longer be under my care, and," added he, with a sigh, "then you can do what you will with it."
"So," cried Milady, as if she could not resist giving utterance to a holy indignation, "you, a pious man, you who are called a just man, you ask but one thing, and that is that you may not be inculpated, annoyed by my death."
"It is my duty to watch over your life, madam, and I will watch."
"But do you understand the mission you are fulfilling? Cruel enough, if I am guilty, but what name can you give it, what name will the Lord give it, if I am innocent?"
"I am a soldier, madam, and fulfill the orders I have received."
"Do you believe, then, that at the day of the last judgment God will separate blind executioners from iniquitous judges? You are not willing that I should kill my body, and you make yourself the agent of him who would kill my soul."
"But I repeat it again to you," replied Felton in great emotion. "No danger threatens you. I will answer for Lord de Winter as for myself."
"Dunce!" cried Milady. "Dunce! Who dares to answer for another man, when the wisest, when those most after God's own heart hesitate to answer for themselves, and who ranges himself on the side of the strongest and the most fortunate to crush the weakest and the most unfortunate." "Impossible, madam, impossible," murmured Felton, who felt to the bottom of his heart the justness of this argument. "A prisoner, you will not recover your liberty through me. Living, you will not lose your life through me." "Yes," cried Milady, "but I shall lose that which is much dearer to me than life. I shall lose my honor, Felton. And it is you whom I make responsible, before God and before men, for my shame and my infamy." This time Felton, immovable as he was, or appeared to be, could not resist the secret influence which had already taken possession of him. To see this woman, so beautiful, fair as the brightest vision, to see her by turns overcome with grief and threatening, to resist at once the ascendancy of grief and beauty, it was too much for a visionary, it was too much for a brain weakened by the ardent dreams of an ecstatic faith, it was too much for a heart furrowed by the love of heaven that burns, by the hatred of men that devours. Milady saw the trouble. She felt by intuition the flame of the opposing passions which burn with the blood in the veins of the young fanatic. As a skilful general, seeing the enemy ready to surrender, marches toward him with a cry of victory, she rose, beautiful as an antique priestess, inspired like a Christian virgin, her arms extended, her throat uncovered, her hair dishevelled, holding with one hand her robe modestly drawn over her breast, her look illumined by that fire which had already created such disorder in the veins of the young Puritan, and went toward him, crying out with a vehement air, and in her melodious voice, to which on this occasion she communicated a terrible energy, "Let this victim to Baal be sent, to the lions the martyr be thrown. Thy God shall teach thee to repent. From the abyss he'll give ear to my moan." Felton stood before this strange apparition like one petrified. "Who art thou? Who art thou?" cried he, clasping his hands. "Art thou a messenger from God? Art thou a messenger from hell? Art thou an angel or a demon? Callest thou thyself Eloa or Astarte?" "Do you not know me, Felton? I am neither an angel nor a demon. I am a daughter of earth. I am a sister of thy faith, that is all." "Yes, yes," said Felton. "I doubted, but now I believe." "You believe, and still you are an accomplice of that child of Belial which is called Lord de Winter. You believe, and yet you leave me in the hands of mine enemies, of the enemy of England, of the enemy of God. You believe, and yet you deliver me up to him who fills and defiles the world with his heresies and debaucheries, to that infamous Sardanapalus, whom the blind call the Duke of Buckingham, and whom believers name Antichrist." "I deliver you up to Buckingham? I? What mean you by that?" "They have eyes," cried Milady, "but they see not. Ears have they, but they hear not." "Yes, yes," said Felton, passing his hands over his brow, covered with sweat, as if to remove his last doubt. "Yes, I recognize the voice which speaks to me in my dreams. Yes, I recognize the features of the angel who appears to me every night, crying to my soul, which cannot sleep, 'Strike, save England, save thyself, for thou wilt die without having appeased God.' Speak, speak," cried Felton. "I can understand you now." A flash of terrible joy, but rapid as thought, gleamed from the eyes of Milady. However fugitive this homicidal flash, Felton saw it, and started as if its light had revealed the abysses of this woman's heart. He recalled all at once the warnings of Lord de Winter, the seductions of Milady, her first attempts after her arrival. He drew back a step and hung down his head, without, however, ceasing to look at her, as if, fascinated by this strange creature,
He could not detach his eyes from her eyes. Milady was not a woman to misunderstand the meaning of this hesitation. Under her apparent emotions, her icy coolness never abandoned her. Before Felton replied, and before she should be forced to resume this conversation, so difficult to be sustained in the same exalted tone, she let her hands fall, and as if the weakness of the woman overpowered the enthusiasm of the inspired fanatic, she said, "But no, it is not for me to be the Judith to deliver Bethulia from this Holofernes. The sword of the Eternal is too heavy for my arm. Allow me, then, to avoid dishonour by death. Let me take refuge in martyrdom. I do not ask you for liberty, as a guilty one would, nor for vengeance, as would a pagan. Let me die, that is all. I supplicate you. I implore you on my knees. Let me die, and my last sigh shall be a blessing for my preserver." Hearing that voice, so sweet and suppliant, seeing that look, so timid and downcast, Felton reproached himself. By degrees the enchantress had clothed herself with that magic adornment which she assumed and threw aside at will. That is to say, beauty, meekness, and tears, and above all the irresistible attraction of mystical voluptuousness, the most devouring of all voluptuousness. "Alas," said Felton, "I can do but one thing, which is to pity you if you prove to me you are a victim. But Lord de Winter makes cruel accusations against you. You are a Christian. You are my sister in religion. I feel myself drawn toward you. I, who have never loved anyone but my benefactor. I, who have met with nothing but traitors and impious men. But you, madam, so beautiful in reality, you, so pure in appearance, must have committed great iniquities for Lord de Winter to pursue you thus." "They have eyes," repeated Milady with an accent of indescribable grief, "but they see not. Ears have they, but they hear not." "But," cried the young officer, "speak, then, speak!" "Confide my shame to you," cried Milady, with the blush of modesty upon her countenance. "For often the crime of one becomes the shame of another. Confide my shame to you, a man, and I a woman? Oh," continued she, placing her hand modestly over her beautiful eyes, "never, never, I could not." "To me? To a brother?" said Felton. Milady looked at him for some time with an expression which the young man took for doubt, but which, however, was nothing but observation, or rather the wish to fascinate. Felton, in his turn a suppliant, clasped his hands. "Well, then," said Milady, "I confide in my brother. I will dare to—" At this moment the steps of Lord de Winter were heard, but this time the terrible brother-in-law of Milady did not content himself, as on the preceding day, with passing before the door and going away again. He paused, exchanged 2 words with the sentinel, then the door opened and he appeared. From the exchange of these 2 words Felton drew back quickly, and when Lord de Winter entered, he was several paces from the prisoner. The baron entered slowly, sending a scrutinizing glance from Milady to the young officer. "You have been here a very long time, John," said he. "Has this woman been relating her crimes to you? In that case, I can comprehend the length of the conversation." Felton started, and Milady felt she was lost if she did not come to the assistance of the disconcerted Puritan. "Ah, you fear your prisoner should escape," said she. "Well, ask your worthy jailer what favour I this instant solicited of him." "You demanded a favour?" said the baron, suspiciously. "Yes, my lord," replied the young man, confused. "And what favour, pray?" asked Lord de Winter. "A knife, which she would return to me through the grating of the door a minute after she had received it." replied Felton.
There is some one, then, concealed here whose throat this amiable lady is desirous of cutting,
said De Winter in an ironical, contemptuous tone.
There is myself, replied Milady.
I have given you the choice between America and Tyburn, replied Lord de Winter. Choose Tyburn, madam. Believe me, the cord is more certain than the knife.
Felton grew pale and made a step forward, remembering that at the moment he entered, Milady had a rope in her hand. You are right, said she. I have often thought of it. Then she added in a low voice, and I will think of it again. Felton felt a shudder run to the marrow of his bones. Probably Lord de Winter perceived this emotion.
Mistrust yourself, John, said he. I have placed reliance upon you, my friend. Beware! I have warned you. But be of good courage, my lad. In 3 days we shall be delivered from this creature, and where I shall send her, she can harm nobody.
You hear him! Cried Milady with vehemence, so that the Baron might believe she was addressing heaven, and that Felton might understand she was addressing him. Felton lowered his head and reflected. The Baron took the young officer by the arm and turned his head over his shoulder so as not to lose sight of Milady till he was gone out. Well, said the prisoner when the door was shut, I am not so far advanced as I believed. De Winter has changed his usual stupidity into a strange prudence. It is the desire of vengeance, and how desire moulds a man. As to Felton, he hesitates. Ah, he is not a man like that cursed D'Artagnan. A Puritan only adores virgins, and he adores them by clasping his hands. A Musketeer loves women, and he loves them by clasping his arms around them. Milady waited then with much impatience, for she feared the day would pass away without her seeing Felton again. At last, in an hour after the scene we have just described, she heard someone speaking in a low voice at the door. Presently the door opened, and she perceived Felton. The young man advanced rapidly into the chamber, leaving the door open behind him, and making a sign to Milady to be silent. His face was much agitated. What do you want with me? Said she. Listen, said Felton in a low voice. I have just sent away the sentinel that I might remain here without anybody knowing it, in order to speak to you without being overheard. The Baron has just related a frightful story to me. Milady assumed her smile of a resigned victim and shook her head. Either you are a demon, continued Felton, or the Baron, my benefactor, my father, is a monster. I have known you 4 days. I have loved him 4 years. I therefore may hesitate between you. Be not alarmed at what I say. I want to be convinced. Tonight, after 12, I will come and see you, and you shall convince me. No, Felton, no, my brother, said she. The sacrifice is too great, and I feel what it must cost you. No, I am lost. Do not be lost with me. My death will be much more eloquent than my life, and the silence of the corpse will convince you much better than the words of the prisoner. Be silent, madam, cried Felton, and do not speak to me thus. I came to entreat you to promise me, upon your honor, to swear to me by what you hold most sacred, that you will make no attempt upon your life. I will not promise, said Milady, for no one has more respect for a promise or an oath than I have, and if I make a promise, I must keep it. Well, said Felton, only promise till you have seen me again. If when you have seen me again you still persist, well, then you shall be free, and I myself will give you the weapon you desire. Well, said Milady, for you I will wait. Swear. I swear it, by our God. Are you satisfied? Well, said Felton, till tonight. And he darted out of the room, shut the door, and waited in the corridor.
the soldier's half-pike in his hand, and as if he had mounted guard in his place. The soldier returned, and Felton gave him back his weapon. Then through the grating to which she had drawn near, Milady saw the young man make a sign with delirious fervour, and depart in an apparent transport of joy. As for her, she returned to her place with a smile of savage contempt upon her lips, and repeated, blaspheming, that terrible name of God, by whom she had just sworn without ever having learned to know him.
"My God," said she, "what a senseless fanatic! My God, it is I, and this fellow who will help me to avenge myself."
End of chapter. Chapter 56 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 56. Captivity, the Fifth Day. Milady had, however, achieved a half-triumph, and success doubled her forces. It was not difficult to conquer, as she had hitherto done, men prompt to let themselves be seduced, and whom the gallant education of a court led quickly into her net. Milady was handsome enough not to find much resistance on the part of the flesh, and she was sufficiently skilful to prevail over all the obstacles of the mind. But this time she had to contend with an unpolished nature, concentrated and insensible by force of austerity. Religion and its observances had made Felton a man inaccessible to ordinary seductions. There fermented in that sublimated brain plans so vast, projects so tumultuous, that there remained no room for any capricious or material love, that sentiment which is fed by leisure and grows with corruption. Milady had, then, made a breach by her false virtue in the opinion of a man horribly prejudiced against her, and by her beauty in the heart of a man hitherto chaste and pure. In short, she had taken the measure of motives hitherto unknown to herself through this experiment made upon the most rebellious subject that nature and religion could submit to her study. Many a time, nevertheless, during the evening she despaired of fate and of herself. She did not invoke God, we very well know, but she had faith in the genius of evil, that immense sovereignty which reigns in all the details of human life, and by which, as in the Arabian fable, a single pomegranate seed is sufficient to reconstruct a ruined world. Milady, being well prepared for the reception of Felton, was able to erect her batteries for the next day. She knew she had only 2 days left, that when once the order was signed by Buckingham, and Buckingham would sign it the more readily from its bearing a false name, and he could not therefore recognize the woman in question, once this order was signed, we say, the baron would make her embark immediately, and she knew very well that women condemned to exile employ arms much less powerful in their seductions than the pretendedly virtuous woman whose beauty is lighted by the sun of the world, whose style the voice of fashion lauds, and whom a halo of aristocracy gilds with enchanting splendours. To be a woman condemned to a painful and disgraceful punishment is no impediment to beauty, but it is an obstacle to the recovery of power. Like all persons of real genius, Milady knew what suited her nature and her means. Poverty was repugnant to her. Degradation took away 2/3 of her greatness. Milady was only a queen while among queens. The pleasure of satisfied pride was necessary to her domination. To command inferior beings was rather a humiliation than a pleasure to her. She should certainly return from her exile, she did not doubt that a single instant, but how long might this exile last? For an active, ambitious nature like that of Milady, days not spent in climbing are inauspicious days. What word, then, can be found to describe the days which they occupy in descending? To lose a year, 2 years, 3 years, is to talk of an eternity, To return after the death or disgrace of the cardinal, perhaps; to return when D'Artagnan and his friends, happy and triumphant, should have received from the queen the reward they had well acquired by the services they had rendered her. These were devouring ideas that a woman like Milady could not endure. For the rest, the storm which raged within her doubled her strength, and she would have burst the walls of her prison if her body had been able to take for a single instant the proportions of her mind. Then that which spurred her on additionally in the midst of all this was the remembrance of the cardinal. What must the mistrustful, restless, suspicious cardinal think of her silence? The cardinal, not merely her only support, her only prop, her only protector at present, but still further, the principal instrument of her future fortune and vengeance. She knew him. She knew that at her return from a fruitless journey it would be in vain to tell him of her imprisonment, in vain to enlarge upon the suffering she had undergone. The cardinal would reply, with the sarcastic calmness of the sceptic, strong at once by power and genius, "You should not have allowed yourself to be taken." Then Milady collected all her energies, murmuring in the depths of her soul the name of Felton, the only beam of light that penetrated to her in the hell into which she had fallen, and like a serpent which folds and unfolds its rings to ascertain its strength, she enveloped Felton beforehand in the thousand meshes of her inventive imagination. Time, however, passed away. The hours, one after another, seemed to awaken the clock as they passed, and every blow of the brass hammer resounded upon the heart of the prisoner. At 9 o'clock, Lord de Winter made his customary visit, examined the window and the bars, sounded the floor and the walls, looked to the chimney and the doors, without, during this long and minute examination, he or Milady pronouncing a single word. Doubtless both of them understood that the situation had become too serious to lose time in useless words and aimless wrath. "Well," said the Baron, on leaving her, "you will not escape tonight." At 10 o'clock Felton came and placed the sentinel. Milady recognised his step. She was as well acquainted with it now as a mistress is with that of the lover of her heart. And yet Milady at the same time detested and despised this weak fanatic. That was not the appointed hour. Felton did not enter. 2 hours after, as midnight sounded, the sentinel was relieved. This time it was the hour, and from this moment Milady waited with impatience. The new sentinel commenced his walk in the corridor. At the expiration of 10 minutes, Felton came. Milady was all attention. "Listen," said the young man to the sentinel. "On no pretence leave the door, for you know that last night my lord punished a soldier for having quit his post for an instant, although I, during his absence, watched in his place." "Yes, I know it," said the soldier. "I recommend you, therefore, to keep the strictest watch. For my part, I am going to pay a second visit to this woman, who I fear entertains sinister intentions upon her own life, and I have received orders to watch her." "Good," murmured Milady. "The austere Puritan lies." As to the soldier, he only smiled. "Zounds, lieutenant," said he, "you are not unlucky to be charged with such commissions, particularly if my lord has authorized you to look into her bed." Felton blushed. Under any other circumstances he would have reprimanded the soldier for indulging in such pleasantry, but his conscience murmured too loud for his mouth to dare speak. "If I call, come," said he. "If anyone comes, call me." "I will, lieutenant," said the soldier. Felton entered Milady's apartment. Milady arose. "You are here," said she. "I promised to come," said Felton, "and I have come." "You promised me something else." "What, my God!" said the young man, who, in spite of his self-command, felt his knees tremble and the sweat start from his brow. "You promised to bring a knife and to leave it with me after our interview." "Say no more of that, madam," said Felton. There is no situation, however terrible it may be, which can authorize a creature of God to inflict death upon himself. I have reflected, and I cannot, must not be guilty of such a sin.
Ah, you have reflected, said the prisoner, sitting down in her armchair with a smile of disdain. And I also have reflected.
Upon what?
That I can have nothing to say to a man who does not keep his word.
Oh, my God, murmured Felton.
You may retire, said Milady. I will not talk.
Here is the knife, said Felton, drawing from his pocket the weapon which he had brought, according to his promise, but which he hesitated to give to his prisoner.
Let me see it, said Milady.
For what purpose?
Upon my honour, I will instantly return it to you. You shall place it on that table, and you may remain between it and me.
Felton offered the weapon to Milady, who examined the temper of it attentively, and who tried the point on the tip of her finger.
Well, said she, returning the knife to the young officer, this is fine and good steel. You are a faithful friend, Felton.
Felton took back the weapon and laid it upon the table, as he had agreed with the prisoner. Milady followed him with her eyes and made a gesture of satisfaction.
Now, said she, listen to me.
The request was needless. The young officer stood upright before her, awaiting her words as if to devour them.
Felton, said Milady with a solemnity full of melancholy, imagine that your sister, the daughter of your father, speaks to you. While yet young, unfortunately handsome, I was dragged into a snare. I resisted. Ambushes and violences multiplied around me, but I resisted. The religion I serve, the God I adore, were blasphemed because I called upon that religion and that God, but still I resisted. Then outrages were heaped upon me, and as my soul was not subdued, they wished to defile my body forever. Finally,
Milady stopped, and a bitter smile passed over her lips. Finally, said Felton, finally, what did they do?
At length, one evening, my enemy resolved to paralyze the resistance he could not conquer. One evening he mixed a powerful narcotic with my water. Scarcely had I finished my repast when I felt myself sink by degrees into a strange torpor. Although I was without mistrust, a vague fear seized me, and I tried to struggle against sleepiness. I arose. I wished to run to the window and call for help, but my legs refused their office. It appeared as if the ceiling sank upon my head and crushed me with its weight. I stretched out my arms. I tried to speak. I could only utter inarticulate sounds. An irresistible faintness came over me. I supported myself by a chair, feeling that I was about to fall, but this support was soon insufficient on account of my weak arms. I fell upon one knee, then upon both. I tried to pray, but my tongue was frozen. God doubtless neither heard nor saw me, and I sank upon the floor a prey to a slumber which resembled death. Of all that passed in that sleep, or the time which glided away while it lasted, I have no remembrance. The only thing I recollect is that I awoke in bed in a round chamber, the furniture of which was sumptuous, and into which light only penetrated by an opening in the ceiling. No door gave entrance to the room. It might be called a magnificent prison. It was a long time before I was able to make out what place I was in, or to take account of the details I describe. My mind appeared to strive in vain to shake off the heavy darkness of the sleep from which I could not rouse myself. I had vague perceptions of space traversed, of the rolling of a carriage, of a horrible dream in which my strength had become exhausted. But all this was so dark and so indistinct in my mind that these events seemed to belong to another life than mine, and yet mixed with mine in fantastic duality. At times the state into which I had fallen appeared so strange that I believed myself dreaming. I arose trembling. My clothes were near me on a chair. I neither remembered having undressed myself nor going to bed. Then, by degrees, the reality broke upon me, full of chaste terrors. I was no longer in the house where I had dwelt. As well as I could judge by the light of the sun, the day was already 2/3 gone. It was the evening before when I had fallen asleep. My sleep then must have lasted 24 hours. What had taken place during this long sleep? I dressed myself as quickly as possible. My slow and stiff motions all attested that the effects of the narcotic were not yet entirely dissipated. The chamber was evidently furnished for the reception of a woman, and the most finished coquette could not have formed a wish, but on casting her eyes about the apartment, she would have found that wish accomplished. Certainly I was not the first captive that had been shut up in this splendid prison, but you may easily comprehend, Felton, that the more superb the prison, the greater was my terror. Yes, it was a prison, for I tried in vain to get out of it. I sounded all the walls, in the hopes of discovering a door, but everywhere the walls returned a full and flat sound. I made the tour of the room at least 20 times, in search of an outlet of some kind, but there was none. I sank, exhausted with fatigue and terror, into an armchair. Meantime, night came on rapidly, and with night my terrors increased. I did not know but I had better remain where I was seated. It appeared that I was surrounded with unknown dangers, into which I was about to fall at every instant. Although I had eaten nothing since the evening before, my fears prevented my feeling hunger. No noise from without, by which I could measure the time, reached me. I only supposed it must be 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, for it was in the month of October and it was quite dark. All at once, the noise of a door turning on its hinges made me start. A globe of fire appeared above the glazed opening of the ceiling, casting a strong light into my chamber, and I perceived with terror that a man was standing within a few paces of me. A table, with 2 covers, bearing a supper ready prepared, stood as if by magic in the middle of the apartment. That man was he who had pursued me during a whole year, who had vowed my dishonour, and who, by the first words that issued from his mouth, gave me to understand he had accomplished it the preceding night.
"Scoundrel!" murmured Felton.
"Oh, yes, scoundrel!" cried Milady, seeing the interest which the young officer, whose soul seemed to hang on her lips, took in this strange recital. "Oh, yes, scoundrel! He believed, having triumphed over me in my sleep, that all was completed. He came hoping that I would accept my shame as my shame was consummated. He came to offer his fortune in exchange for my love. All that the heart of a woman could contain of haughty contempt and disdainful words I poured out upon this man. Doubtless he was accustomed to such reproaches, for he listened to me calm and smiling, with his arms crossed over his breast. Then, when he thought I had said all, he advanced toward me. I sprang toward the table. I seized a knife. I placed it to my breast. "Take one step more," said I, "and in addition to my dishonour, you shall have my death to reproach yourself with." There was no doubt in my look, my voice, my whole person, that sincerity of gesture, of attitude, of accent, which carries conviction to the most perverse minds, for he paused. "Your death?" said he. "Oh, no, you are too charming a mistress to allow me to consent to lose you thus, after I have had the happiness to possess you only a single time. Adieu, my charmer. I will wait to pay you my next visit till you are in a better humour." At these words he blew a whistle. The globe of fire which lighted the room reascended and disappeared. I found myself again in complete darkness. The same noise of a door opening and shutting was repeated the instant afterward. The flaming globe descended afresh, and I was completely alone. This moment was frightful. If I had any doubts as to my misfortune, these doubts had vanished in an overwhelming reality. I was in the power of a man whom I not only detested, but despised, of a man capable of anything, and who had already given me a fatal proof of what he was able to do.
"But who, then, was this man?" asked Felton.
I passed the night on a chair, starting at the least noise, for toward midnight the lamp went out, and I was again in darkness. But the night passed away without any fresh attempt on the part of my persecutor. Day came. The table had disappeared, only I had still the knife in my hand. This knife was my only hope. I was worn out with fatigue. Sleeplessness inflamed my eyes. I had not dared to sleep a single instant. The light of day reassured me. I went and threw myself on the bed, without parting with the emancipating knife, which I concealed under my pillow. When I awoke, a fresh meal was served. This time, in spite of my terrors, in spite of my agony, I began to feel a devouring hunger. It was 48 hours since I had taken any nourishment. I ate some bread and some fruit. Then, remembering the narcotic mixed with the water I had drunk, I would not touch that which was placed on the table, but filled my glass at a marble fountain fixed in the wall over my dressing table. And yet, notwithstanding these precautions, I remained for some time in a terrible agitation of mind. But my fears were this time ill-founded. I passed the day without experiencing anything of the kind I dreaded. I took the precaution to half empty the carafe, in order that my suspicions might not be noticed. The evening came on, and with it darkness. But however profound was this darkness, my eyes began to accustom themselves to it. I saw, amid the shadows, the table sink through the floor. A quarter of an hour later, it reappeared bearing my supper. In an instant, thanks to the lamp, my chamber was once more lighted. I was determined to eat only such things as could not possibly have anything so horrific introduced into them. 2 eggs and some fruit composed my repast. Then I drew another glass of water from my protecting fountain and drank it. At the first swallow, it appeared to me not to have the same taste as in the morning. Suspicion instantly seized me. I paused, but I had already drunk half a glass. I threw the rest away with horror, and waited with the dew of fear upon my brow. No doubt some invisible witness had seen me draw the water from that fountain, and had taken advantage of my confidence in it, the better to assure my ruin, so coolly resolved upon, so cruelly pursued. Half an hour had not passed when the same symptoms began to appear, but as I had only drunk half a glass of the water, I contended longer, and instead of falling entirely asleep, I sank into a state of drowsiness, which left me a perception of what was passing around me, while depriving me of the strength either to defend myself or to fly. I dragged myself toward the bed to seek the only defence I had left, my saving knife, but I could not reach the bolster. I sank on my knees, my hands clasped round one of the bedposts. Then I felt that I was lost. Felton became frightfully pale, and a convulsive tremor crept through his whole body. And what was most frightful, continued Milady, her voice altered, as if she still experienced the same agony as at that awful minute, was that at this time I retained a consciousness of the danger that threatened me. Was that my soul, if I may say so, waked in my sleeping body? Was that I saw, that I heard? It is true that all was like a dream, but it was not the less frightful. I saw the lamp ascend and leave me in darkness. Then I heard the well-known creaking of the door, although I had heard that door open but twice. I felt instinctively that someone approached me. It is said that the doomed wretch in the deserts of America thus feels the approach of the serpent. I wished to make an effort. I attempted to cry out. By an incredible effort of will, I even raised myself up, but only to sink down again immediately and to fall into the arms of my persecutor.
"Tell me who this man was," cried the young officer. Milady saw at a single glance all the painful feelings she inspired in Felton by dwelling on every detail of her recital, but she would not spare him a single pang. The more profoundly she wounded his heart, the more certainly he would avenge her. She continued then, as if she had not heard his exclamation, or as if she thought the moment was not yet come to reply to it.
Only this time it was no longer an inert body without feeling that the villain had to deal with. I have told you that without being able to regain the complete exercise of my faculties, I retained the sense of my danger. I struggled then with all my strength, and doubtless opposed, weak as I was, a long resistance, for I heard him cry out, "These miserable Puritans! I knew very well that they tired out their executioners, but I did not believe them so strong against their lovers." Alas! This desperate resistance could not last long. I felt my strength fail, and this time it was not my sleep that enabled the coward to prevail, but my swoon. Felton listened without uttering any word or sound except an inward expression of agony. The sweat streamed down his marble forehead, and his hand, under his coat, tore his breast. My first impulse, on coming to myself, was to feel under my pillow for the knife I had not been able to reach. If it had not been useful for defence, it might at least serve for expiation. But on taking this knife, Felton, a terrible idea occurred to me. I have sworn to tell you all, and I will tell you all. I have promised you the truth. I will tell it, were it to destroy me.
"The idea came into your mind to avenge yourself on this man, did it not?" cried Felton.
"Yes," said Milady. "The idea was not that of a Christian, I knew, but without doubt that eternal enemy of our souls, that lion roaring constantly around us, breathed it into my mind. In short, what shall I say to you, Felton?" continued Milady, in the tone of a woman accusing herself of a crime. "This idea occurred to me, and did not leave me. It is of this homicidal thought that I now bear the punishment."
"Continue, continue," said Felton. "I am eager to see you attain your vengeance."
"Oh, I resolved that it should take place as soon as possible. I had no doubt he would return the following night. During the day I had nothing to fear. When the hour of breakfast came, therefore, I did not hesitate to eat and drink. I had determined to make believe sup, but to eat nothing. I was forced then to combat the fast of the evening with the nourishment of the morning. Only I concealed a glass of water, which remained after my breakfast, thirst having been the chief of my sufferings when I remained 48 hours without eating or drinking. The day passed away without having any other influence on me than to strengthen the resolution I had formed. Only I took care that my face should not betray the thoughts of my heart, for I had no doubt I was watched. Several times, even, I felt a smile on my lips. Felton, I dare not tell you at what idea I smiled. You would hold me in horror.
Go on," said Felton. "You see plainly that I listen, and that I am anxious to know the end."
Evening came. The ordinary events took place. During the darkness, as before, my supper was brought. Then the lamp was lighted, and I sat down to table. I only ate some fruit. I pretended to pour out water from the jug, but I only drank that which I had saved in my glass. The substitution was made so carefully that my spies, if I had any, could have no suspicion of it. After supper I exhibited the same marks of languor as on the preceding evening, but this time, as I yielded to fatigue, or as if I had become familiarized with danger, I dragged myself toward my bed, let my robe fall, and lay down. I found my knife where I had placed it, under my pillow, and while feigning to sleep, my hand grasped the handle of it convulsively. 2 hours passed away without anything fresh happening. Oh, my God, who could have said so the evening before? I began to fear that he would not come. At length I saw the lamp rise softly and disappear in the depths of the ceiling. My chamber was filled with darkness and obscurity, but I made a strong effort to penetrate this darkness and obscurity. Nearly 10 minutes passed. I heard no other noise but the beating of my own heart. I implored heaven that he might come. At length I heard the well-known noise of the door, which opened and shut. I heard, notwithstanding the thickness of the carpet, a step which made the floor creak. I saw, notwithstanding the darkness, a shadow which approached my bed.
"Haste, haste!" said Felton. "Do you not see that each of your words burns me like molten lead?"
Then, continued Milady, then I collected all my strength. I recalled to my mind that the moment of vengeance, or rather of justice, had struck. I looked upon myself as another Judith. I gathered myself up, my knife in my hand, and when I saw him near me, stretching out his arms to find his victim, then, with a last cry of agony and despair, I struck him in the middle of his breast. The miserable villain! He had foreseen all. His breast was covered with a coat of mail. The knife was bent against it. "Ah, ah!" cried he, seizing my arm and wresting from me the weapon that had so badly served me. "You want to take my life, do you, my pretty Puritan? But that's more than dislike. That's ingratitude. Come, come, calm yourself, my sweet girl. I thought you had softened. I am not one of those tyrants who detain women by force. You don't love me. With my usual fatuity, I doubted it. Now I am convinced. Tomorrow you shall be free." I had but one wish. That was that he should kill me. "Beware," said I, "for my liberty is your dishonour." "Explain yourself, my pretty Sibyl." "Yes, for as soon as I leave this place I will tell everything. I will proclaim the violence you have used toward me. I will describe my captivity. I will denounce this place of infamy. You are placed on high, my lord, but tremble. Above you there is the king. Above the king there is God." However perfect master he was over himself, my persecutor allowed a movement of anger to escape him. I could not see the expression of his countenance, but I felt the arm tremble upon which my hand was placed. "Then you shall not leave this place," said he. "Very well," cried I. "Then the place of my punishment will be that of my tomb. I will die here, and you will see if a phantom that accuses is not more terrible than a living being that threatens." "You shall have no weapon left in your power." "There is a weapon which despair has placed within the reach of every creature who has the courage to use it. I will allow myself to die with hunger." "Come," said the wretch, "is not peace much better than such a war as that? I will restore you to liberty this moment. I will proclaim you a piece of immaculate virtue. I will name you the Lucretia of England. And I will say that you are the Sextus. I will denounce you before men, as I have denounced you before God. And if it be necessary that, like Lucretia, I should sign my accusation with my blood, I will sign it." "Ah," said my enemy in a jeering tone, "that's quite another thing. My faith, everything considered, you are very well off here. You shall want for nothing, and if you let yourself die of hunger, that will be your own fault." At these words he retired. I heard the door open and shut, and I remained overwhelmed, less, I confess it, by my grief than by the mortification of not having avenged myself. He kept his word. All the day, All the next night passed away without my seeing him again. But I also kept my word with him, and I neither ate nor drank. I was, as I told him, resolved to die of hunger. I passed the day and the night in prayer, for I hoped that God would pardon me my suicide. The second night the door opened. I was lying on the floor, for my strength began to abandon me. At the noise I raised myself up on one hand. "Well," said a voice which vibrated in too terrible a manner in my ear not to be recognized. "Well, are we softened a little? Will we not pay for our liberty with a single promise of silence? Come, I am a good sort of a prince," added he, "and although I like not Puritans, I do them justice, and it is the same with Puritanesses when they are pretty. Come, take a little oath for me on the cross. I won't ask anything more of you." "On the cross!" cried I, rising, for at that abhorred voice I had recovered all my strength. "On the cross I swear that no promise, no menace, no force, no torture shall close my mouth. On the cross I swear to denounce you everywhere as a murderer, as a thief of honour, as a base coward. On the cross I swear, if I ever leave this place, to call down vengeance upon you from the whole human race." "Beware," said the voice, in a threatening accent that I had never yet heard. "I have an extraordinary means which I will not employ, but in the last extremity to close your mouth, or at least to prevent anyone from believing a word you may utter." I mustered all my strength to reply to him with a burst of laughter. He saw that it was a merciless war between us, a war to the death. "Listen," said he. "I give you the rest of tonight and all day tomorrow. Reflect. Promise to be silent, and riches, consideration, even honour shall surround you. Threaten to speak, and I will condemn you to infamy." "You!" cried I. "You!" "To interminable, ineffaceable infamy." "You!" repeated I. Oh, I declare to you, Felton, I thought him mad. "Yes, yes, I," replied he. "Oh, leave me," said I. "Begone if you do not desire to see me dash my head against that wall before your eyes." "Very well, it is your own doing. Till tomorrow evening, then." "Till tomorrow evening, then," replied I, allowing myself to fall and biting the carpet with rage. Felton leaned for support upon a piece of furniture, and Milady saw, with the joy of a demon, that his strength would fail him perhaps before the end of her recital. End of chapter. Chapter 57 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 57, Means for Classical Tragedy. After a moment of silence employed by Milady in observing the young man who listened to her, Milady continued her recital. "It was nearly 3 days since I had eaten or drunk anything. I suffered frightful torments. At times there passed before me clouds which pressed my brow, which veiled my eyes. This was delirium. When the evening came, I was so weak that every time I fainted I thanked God, for I thought I was about to die. In the midst of one of these swoons I heard the door open. Terror recalled me to myself. He entered the apartment followed by a man in a mask. He was masked likewise, but I knew his step. I knew his voice. I knew him by that imposing bearing which hell has bestowed upon his person for the curse of humanity. "Well," said he to me, "have you made your mind up to take the oath I requested of you? You have said Puritans have but one word. Mine you have heard, and that is to pursue you, on earth to the tribunal of men, in heaven to the tribunal of God." You persist, then? I swear it before the God who hears me. I will take the whole world as a witness of your crime, and that until I have found an avenger. You are a prostitute, said he in a voice of thunder, and you shall undergo the punishment of prostitutes. Branded in the eyes of the world you invoke, try to prove to that world that you are neither guilty nor mad. Then, addressing the man who accompanied him, Executioner, said he, do your duty. Oh, his name! His name! Cried Felton. His name! Tell it me! Then, in spite of my cries, in spite of my resistance, for I began to comprehend that there was a question of something worse than death, the executioner seized me, threw me on the floor, fastened me with his bonds, and suffocated by sobs, almost without sense, invoking God, who did not listen to me, I uttered all at once a frightful cry of pain and shame. A burning fire, a red-hot iron, the iron of the executioner, was imprinted on my shoulder. Felton uttered a groan. Here, said Milady, rising with the majesty of a queen, here, Felton, behold the new martyrdom invented for a pure young girl, the victim of the brutality of a villain. Learn to know the heart of men, and henceforth make yourself less easily the instrument of their unjust vengeance. Milady, with a rapid gesture, opened her robe, tore the cambric that covered her bosom, and, red with feigned anger and simulated shame, showed the young man the ineffaceable impression which dishonoured that beautiful shoulder. But, cried Felton, that is a fleur-de-lis which I see there. And therein consisted the infamy, replied Milady. The brand of England. It would be necessary to prove what tribunal had imposed it on me, and I could have made a public appeal to all the tribunals of the kingdom. But the brand of France! Oh, by that, I was branded indeed. This was too much for Felton. Pale, motionless, overwhelmed by this frightful revelation, dazzled by the superhuman beauty of this woman who unveiled herself before him with an immodesty which appeared to him sublime, he ended by falling on his knees before her as the early Christians did before those pure and holy martyrs which the persecution of the emperors gave up in the circus to the sanguinary sensuality of the populace. The brand disappeared. The beauty alone remained. Pardon! Pardon! cried Felton. Oh, pardon! Milady read in his eyes, love, love. Pardon for what? asked she. Pardon me for having joined with your persecutors. Milady held out her hand to him. So beautiful, so young, cried Felton, covering that hand with his kisses. Milady let one of those looks fall upon him which make a slave of a king. Felton was a Puritan. He abandoned the hand of this woman to kiss her feet. He no longer loved her. He adored her. When this crisis was past, when Milady appeared to have resumed her self-possession, which she had never lost, when Felton had seen her recover with the veil of chastity those treasures of love which were only concealed from him to make him desire them the more ardently, he said, Ah, now, I have only one thing to ask of you, that is, the name of your true executioner, for to me there is but one. The other was an instrument, that was all. What, brother? cried Milady. Must I name him again? Have you not yet divined who he is? What? cried Felton. He, again he, always he. What, the truly guilty? The truly guilty, said Milady, is the ravager of England, the persecutor of true believers, the base ravisher of the honour of so many women. He who, to satisfy a caprice of his corrupt heart, is about to make England shed so much blood, who protects the Protestants today and will betray them tomorrow. Buckingham! It is then Buckingham! Cried Felton in a high state of excitement.
Milady concealed her face in her hands, as if she could not endure the shame which this name recalled to her.
Buckingham, the executioner of this angelic creature! Cried Felton. And thou hast not hurled thy thunder at him, my God! And thou hast left him noble, honoured, powerful, for the ruin of us all!
God abandons him who abandons himself, said Milady.
But he will draw upon his head the punishment reserved for the damned, said Felton with increasing exultation. He wills that human vengeance should precede celestial justice.
Men fear him and spare him.
I, said Felton, I do not fear him, nor will I spare him.
The soul of Milady was bathed in an infernal joy.
But how can Lord de Winter, my protector, my father, asked Felton, possibly be mixed up with all this?
Listen, Felton, resumed Milady, for by the side of base and contemptible men there are often found great and generous natures. I had an affianced husband, a man whom I loved, and who loved me. A heart like yours, Felton, a man like you. I went to him and told him all. He knew me, that man did, and did not doubt an instant. He was a nobleman, a man equal to Buckingham in every respect. He said nothing. He only girded on his sword, wrapped himself in his cloak, and went straight to Buckingham Palace.
Yes, yes, said Felton. I understand how he would act, but with such men it is not the sword that should be employed, it is the poniard.
Buckingham had left England the day before, sent as ambassador to Spain, to demand the hand of the Infanta for King Charles I, who was then only Prince of Wales. My affianced husband returned. Hear me, said he, this man has gone, and for the moment has consequently escaped my vengeance. But let us be united, as we were to have been, and then leave it to Lord de Winter to maintain his own honour and that of his wife.
Lord de Winter! cried Felton.
Yes, said Milady, Lord de Winter. And now you can understand it all, can you not? Buckingham remained nearly a year absent. A week before his return, Lord de Winter died, leaving me his sole heir. Whence came the blow? God, who knows all, knows without doubt. But as for me, I accuse nobody.
Oh, what an abyss! What an abyss! cried Felton.
Lord de Winter died without revealing anything to his brother. The terrible secret was to be concealed till it burst, like a clap of thunder, over the head of the guilty. Your protector had seen with pain this marriage of his elder brother with a portionless girl. I was sensible that I could look for no support from a man disappointed in his hopes of an inheritance. I went to France, with a determination to remain there for the rest of my life. But all my fortune is in England. Communication being closed by the war, I was in want of everything. I was then obliged to come back again. 6 days ago I landed at Portsmouth.
Well, said Felton.
Well, Buckingham heard by some means, no doubt, of my return. He spoke of me to Lord de Winter, already prejudiced against me, and told him that his sister-in-law was a prostitute, a branded woman. The noble and pure voice of my husband was no longer here to defend me. Lord de Winter believed all that was told him with so much the more ease that it was his interest to believe it. He caused me to be arrested, had me conducted hither, and placed me under your guard. You know the rest. The day after tomorrow he banishes me, he transports me. The day after tomorrow he exiles me among the infamous. Oh, the train is well laid, the plot is clever. My honour will not survive it. You see then, Felton, I can do nothing but die. Felton, give me that knife.
And at these words, as if all her strength was exhausted, Milady sank, weak and languishing, into the arms of the young officer, who, intoxicated with love, anger, and voluptuous sensations hitherto unknown, received her with transport, pressed her against his heart, all trembling at the breath from that charming mouth, bewildered by contact with that palpitating bosom. "No, no," said he. "No, you shall live honoured and pure. You shall live to triumph over your enemies." Milady put him from her slowly with her hand, while drawing him nearer with her look. But Felton, in his turn, embraced her more closely, imploring her like a divinity. "Oh, death, death!" said she, lowering her voice and her eyelids. "Oh, death rather than shame! Felton, my brother, my friend, I conjure you." "No!" cried Felton. "No! You shall live, and you shall be avenged." "Felton, I bring misfortune to all who surround me. Felton, abandon me. Felton, let me die." "Well, then, we will live and die together," cried he, pressing his lips to those of the prisoner. Several strokes resounded on the door. This time Milady really pushed him away from her. "Hark!" said she. "We have been overheard. Someone is coming. All is over. We are lost." "No," said Felton. "It is only the sentinel warning me that they are about to change the guard." "Then run to the door and open it yourself." Felton obeyed. This woman was now his whole thought, his whole soul. He found himself face to face with a sergeant commanding a watch patrol. "Well, what is the matter?" asked the young lieutenant. "You told me to open the door if I heard anyone cry out," said the soldier. "But you forgot to leave me the key. I heard you cry out, without understanding what you said. I tried to open the door, but it was locked inside. Then I called the sergeant." "And here I am," said the sergeant. Felton, quite bewildered, almost mad, stood speechless. Milady plainly perceived that it was now her turn to take part in the scene. She ran to the table, and seizing the knife which Felton had laid down, exclaimed, "And by what right will you prevent me from dying?" "Great God!" exclaimed Felton, on seeing the knife glitter in her hand. At that moment, a burst of ironical laughter resounded through the corridor. The baron, attracted by the noise, in his chamber gown, his sword under his arm, stood in the doorway. "Ah," said he, "here we are at the last act of the tragedy. You see, Felton, the drama has gone through all the phases I named. But be easy, no blood will flow." Milady perceived that all was lost unless she gave Felton an immediate and terrible proof of her courage. "You are mistaken, my lord. Blood will flow, and may that blood fall back on those who cause it to flow." Felton uttered a cry and rushed toward her. He was too late. Milady had stabbed herself. But the knight had fortunately, we ought to say skillfully, come in contact with the steel busk, which at that period, like a cuirass, defended the chests of women. It had glided down it, tearing the robe, and had penetrated slantingly between the flesh and the ribs. Milady's robe was not the less stained with blood in a second. Milady fell down and seemed to be in a swoon. Felton snatched away the knife. "See, my lord," said he, in a deep, gloomy tone, "here is a woman who was under my guard, and who has killed herself." "Be at ease, Felton," said Lord de Winter. "She is not dead. Demons do not die so easily. Be tranquil, and go wait for me in my chamber." "But, my lord—" "Go, sir, I command you." At this injunction from his superior, Felton obeyed, but in going out he put the knife into his bosom. As to Lord de Winter, he contented himself with calling the woman who waited on Milady, and when she was come, he recommended the prisoner, who was still fainting, to her care, and left them alone. Meanwhile, all things considered, and notwithstanding his suspicions, as the wound might be serious, he immediately sent off a mounted man to find a physician. End of chapter. Chapter 58 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 58. Escape. As Lord de Winter had thought, Milady's wound was not dangerous. So soon as she was left alone with the woman whom the Baron had summoned to her assistance, she opened her eyes. It was, however, necessary to affect weakness and pain, not a very difficult task for so finished an actress as Milady. Thus the poor woman was completely the dupe of the prisoner, whom, notwithstanding her hints, she persisted in watching all night. But the presence of this woman did not prevent Milady from thinking. There was no longer a doubt that Felton was convinced. Felton was hers. If an angel appeared to that young man as an accuser of Milady, he would take him, in the mental disposition in which he now found himself, for a messenger sent by the devil. Milady smiled at this thought, for Felton was now her only hope, her only means of safety. But Lord de Winter might suspect him. Felton himself might now be watched. Toward 4 o'clock in the morning the doctor arrived, but since the time Milady stabbed herself, however short, the wound had closed. The doctor could therefore measure neither the direction nor the depth of it. He only satisfied himself by Milady's pulse that the case was not serious. In the morning, Milady, under the pretext that she had not slept well in the night and wanted rest, sent away the woman who attended her. She had one hope, which was that Felton would appear at the breakfast hour. But Felton did not come. Were her fears realized? Was Felton, suspected by the Baron, about to fail her at the decisive moment? She had only 1 day left. Lord de Winter had announced her embarkation for the 23rd, and it was now the morning of the 22nd. Nevertheless, she still waited patiently till the hour for dinner. Although she had eaten nothing in the morning, the dinner was brought in at its usual time. Milady then perceived, with terror, that the uniform of the soldiers who guarded her was changed. Then she ventured to ask what had become of Felton. She was told that he had left the castle an hour before on horseback. She inquired if the Baron was still at the castle. The soldier replied that he was, and that he had given orders to be informed if the prisoner wished to speak to him. Milady replied that she was too weak at present, and that her only desire was to be left alone. The soldier went out, leaving the dinner served. Felton was sent away. The marines were removed. Felton was then mistrusted. This was the last blow to the prisoner. Left alone, she arose. The bed, which she had kept from prudence and that they might believe her seriously wounded, burned her like a bed of fire. She cast a glance at the door. The Baron had had a plank nailed over the grating. He no doubt feared that by this opening she might still by some diabolical means corrupt her guards. Milady smiled with joy. She was free now to give way to her transports without being observed. She traversed her chamber with the excitement of a furious maniac or of a tigress shut up in an iron cage. Certes, if the knife had been left in her power, she would now have thought, not of killing herself, but of killing the Baron. At 6 o'clock Lord de Winter came in. He was armed at all points. This man, in whom Milady till that time had only seen a very simple gentleman, had become an admirable jailer. He appeared to foresee all, to divine all, to anticipate all. A single look at Milady apprised him of all that was passing in her mind. "Ah," said he, "I see, but you shall not kill me today. You have no longer a weapon, and besides, I am on my guard. You had begun to pervert my poor Felton. He was yielding to your infernal influence. But I will save him. He will never see you again. All is over. Get your clothes together. Tomorrow you will go. I had fixed the embarkation for the 24th. but I have reflected that the more promptly the affair takes place, the more sure it will be. Tomorrow, by 12 o'clock, I shall have the order for your exile, signed Buckingham. If you speak a single word to anyone before going aboard ship, my sergeant will blow your brains out. He has orders to do so. If, when on the ship, you speak a single word to anyone before the captain permits you, the captain will have you thrown into the sea. That is agreed upon. Au revoir, then. That is all I have to say today. Tomorrow I will see you again to take my leave.
With these words the baron went out. Milady had listened to all this menacing tirade with a smile of disdain on her lips, but rage in her heart. Supper was served. Milady felt that she stood in need of all her strength. She did not know what might take place during this night which approached so menacingly, for large masses of cloud rolled over the face of the sky, and distant lightning announced a storm. The storm broke about 10 o'clock. Milady felt a consolation in seeing nature partake of the disorder of her heart. The thunder growled in the air like the passion and anger in her thoughts. It appeared to her that the blast, as it swept along, dishevelled her brow, as it bowed the branches of the trees and bore away their leaves. She howled as the hurricane howled, and her voice was lost in the great voice of nature, which also seemed to groan with despair. All at once she heard a tap at her window, and by the help of a flash of lightning she saw the face of a man appear behind the bars. She ran to the window and opened it. "Felton!" cried she. "I am saved!" "Yes," said Felton, "but silence, silence! I must have time to file through these bars. Only take care that I am not seen through the wicket." "Oh, it is a proof that the Lord is on our side, Felton," replied Milady. "They have closed up the grating with a board." "That is well. God has made them senseless," said Felton. "But what must I do?" asked Milady. "Nothing, nothing. Only shut the window. Go to bed, or at least lie down in your clothes. As soon as I have done, I will knock on one of the panes of glass. But will you be able to follow me?" "Oh, yes." "Your wound?" "Gives me pain, but will not prevent my walking." "Be ready, then, at the first signal." Milady shut the window, extinguished the lamp, and went, as Felton had desired her, to lie down on the bed. Amid the moaning of the storm she heard the grinding of the file upon the bars, and by the light of every flash she perceived the shadow of Felton through the panes. She passed an hour without breathing, panting, with a cold sweat upon her brow, and her heart oppressed by frightful agony at every movement she heard in the corridor. There are hours which last a year. At the expiration of an hour, Felton tapped again. Milady sprang out of bed and opened the window. 2 bars removed formed an opening for a man to pass through. "Are you ready?" asked Felton. "Yes. Must I take anything with me?" "Money, if you have any." "Yes. Fortunately, they have left me all I had." "So much the better, for I have expended all mine in chartering a vessel." "Here," said Milady, placing a bag full of louis in Felton's hands. Felton took the bag and threw it to the foot of the wall. "Now," said he, "will you come?" "I am ready." Milady mounted upon a chair and passed the upper part of her body through the window. She saw the young officer suspended over the abyss by a ladder of ropes. For the first time an emotion of terror reminded her that she was a woman. The dark space frightened her. "I expected this," said Felton. "It's nothing, said Milady. "I will descend with my eyes shut." "Have you confidence in me?" said Felton. "You ask that?" "Put your hands together, then. Cross them. That's right." Felton tied her 2 wrists together with his handkerchief, and then with a cord over the handkerchief. "What are you doing?" asked Milady with surprise. "Pass your arms around my neck, and fear nothing." "But I shall make you lose your balance, and we shall both be dashed to pieces." "Don't be afraid. I am a sailor." Not a second was to be lost.
Milady passed her two arms round Felton's neck and let herself slip out of the window. Felton began to descend the ladder slowly, step by step. Despite the weight of two bodies, the blast of the hurricane shook them in the air. All at once Felton stopped.
What is the matter?
asked Milady. Silence, said Felton. I hear footsteps.
We are discovered.
There was a silence of several seconds. No, said Felton, it is nothing.
But what then is the noise?
That of the patrol going their rounds.
Where is their road?
Just under us.
They will discover us.
No, if it does not lighten.
But they will run against the bottom of the ladder.
Fortunately, it is too short by 6 feet.
Here they are. My God!
Silence! Both remained suspended, motionless and breathless, within 20 paces of the ground, while the patrol passed beneath them laughing and talking. This was a terrible moment for the fugitives. The patrol passed. The noise of their retreating footsteps and the murmur of their voices soon died away. Now, said Felton, we are safe. Milady breathed a deep sigh and fainted. Felton continued to descend. Near the bottom of the ladder, where he found no more support for his feet, he clung with his hands. At length, arrived at the last step, he let himself hang by the strength of his wrists and touched the ground. He stooped down, picked up the bag of money, and placed it between his teeth. Then he took Milady in his arms and set off briskly in the direction opposite to that which the patrol had taken. He soon left the pathway of the patrol, descended across the rocks, and when arrived on the edge of the sea, whistled. A similar signal replied to him, and 5 minutes after, a boat appeared, rowed by 4 men. The boat approached as near as it could to the shore, but there was not depth enough of water for it to touch land. Felton walked into the sea up to his middle, being unwilling to trust his precious burden to anybody. Fortunately, the storm began to subside, but still the sea was disturbed. The little boat bounded over the waves like a nutshell. "To the sloop," said Felton, "and row quickly." The 4 men bent to their oars, but the sea was too high to let them get much hold of it. However, they left the castle behind. That was the principal thing. The night was extremely dark. It was almost impossible to see the shore from the boat. They would therefore be less likely to see the boat from the shore. A black point floated on the sea. That was the sloop. While the boat was advancing with all the speed its 4 rowers could give it, Felton untied the cord and then the handkerchief which bound Milady's hands together. When her hands were loosed, he took some sea water and sprinkled it over her face. Milady breathed a sigh and opened her eyes.
"Where am I?"
said she. "Saved," replied the young officer.
"Oh, saved! Saved!" cried she. "Yes, there is the sky, here is the sea. The air I breathe is the air of liberty. Ah, thanks, Felton, thanks."
The young man pressed her to his heart.
"But what is the matter with my hands?" asked Milady. "It seems as if my wrists had been crushed in a vice."
Milady held out her arms. Her wrists were bruised. "Alas," said Felton, looking at those beautiful hands and shaking his head sorrowfully.
"Oh, it's nothing, nothing," cried Milady. "I remember now."
Milady looked around her as if in search of something. "It is there," said Felton, touching the bag of money with his foot. They drew near to the sloop. A sailor on watch hailed the boat. The boat replied.
"What vessel is that?"
asked Milady. "The one I have hired for you."
"Where will it take me?"
"Where you please, after you have put me on shore at Portsmouth."
"What are you going to do at Portsmouth?"
asked Milady. "Accomplish the orders of Lord de Winter," said Felton, with a gloomy smile.
"What orders?"
asked Milady. "You do not understand?" asked Felton.
"No, explain yourself, I beg."
"As he mistrusted me, he determined to guard you himself, and sent me in his place to get Buckingham to sign the order for your transportation."
But if he mistrusted you, how could he confide such an order to you?
How could I know what I was the bearer of?
That's true. And you are going to Portsmouth?
I have no time to lose. Tomorrow is the 23rd, and Buckingham sets sail tomorrow with his fleet.
He sets sail tomorrow. Wherefore?
For La Rochelle?
He need not sail, cried Milady, forgetting her usual presence of mind.
Be satisfied, replied Felton. He will not sail.
Milady started with joy. She could read to the depths of the heart of this young man. The death of Buckingham was written there at full length. Felton, cried she, you are as great as Judas Maccabeus. If you die, I will die with you. That is all I can say to you.
Silence, cried Felton. We are here.
In fact, they touched the sloop. Felton mounted the ladder first and gave his hand to Milady, while the sailors supported her, for the sea was still much agitated. An instant after, they were on the deck.
Captain, said Felton, this is the person of whom I spoke to you, and whom you must convey safe and sound to France.
For 1,000 pistoles,
said the captain. I have paid you 500 of them.
That's correct, said the captain.
And here are the other 500, replied Milady, placing her hand upon the bag of gold.
No, said the captain. I make but one bargain, and I have agreed with this young man that the other 500 shall not be due to me till we arrive at Boulogne.
And shall we arrive there?
Safe and sound, as true as my name's Jack Butler.
Well, said Milady, if you keep your word, instead of 500, I will give you 1,000 pistoles.
Hurrah for you, then, my beautiful lady, cried the captain, and may God often send me such passengers as your ladyship.
Meanwhile, said Felton, convey me to the little bay of— You know it was agreed you should put in there. The captain replied by ordering the necessary manoeuvres, and towards 7 o'clock in the morning the little vessel cast anchor in the bay that had been named. During this passage, Felton related everything to Milady: how, instead of going to London, he had chartered the little vessel; how he had returned; how he had scaled the wall by fastening cramps in the interstices of the stones, as he ascended, to give him foothold; and how, when he had reached the bars, he fastened his ladder. Milady knew the rest. On her side, Milady tried to encourage Felton in his project, but at the first words which issued from her mouth, she plainly saw that the young fanatic stood more in need of being moderated than urged. It was agreed that Milady should wait for Felton till 10 o'clock. If he did not return by 10 o'clock, she was to sail. In that case, and supposing he was at liberty, he was to rejoin her in France, at the convent of the Carmelites at Bethune. End of chapter. Chapter 59 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 59. What took place at Portsmouth, August 23, 1628. Felton took leave of Milady as a brother about to go for a mere walk takes leave of his sister, kissing her hand. His whole body appeared in its ordinary state of calmness. Only an unusual fire beamed from his eyes, like the effects of a fever. His brow was more pale than it generally was. His teeth were clenched, and his speech had a short, dry accent which indicated that something dark was at work within him. As long as he remained in the boat which conveyed him to land, he kept his face toward Milady, who, standing on the deck, followed him with her eyes. Both were free from the fear of pursuit. Nobody ever came into Milady's apartment before 9 o'clock, and it would require 3 hours to go from the castle to London. Felton jumped on shore,
climbed the little ascent which led to the top of the cliff, saluted Milady a last time, and took his course toward the city. At the end of 100 paces the ground began to decline, and he could only see the mast of the sloop. He immediately ran in the direction of Portsmouth, which he saw at nearly half a league before him, standing out in the haze of the morning with its houses and towers. Beyond Portsmouth the sea was covered with vessels whose masts, like a forest of poplars despoiled by the winter, bent with each breath of the wind. Felton, in his rapid walk, reviewed in his mind all the accusations against the favourite of James I and Charles I, furnished by 2 years of premature meditation and a long sojourn among the Puritans. When he compared the public crimes of this minister, startling crimes, European crimes, if so we may say, with the private and unknown crimes with which Milady had charged him, Felton found that the more culpable of the two men which formed the character of Buckingham was the one of whom the public knew not the life. This was because his love, so strange, so new, and so ardent, made him view the infamous and imaginary accusations of Milady de Winter as, through a magnifying glass, one views as frightful monsters atoms in reality imperceptible by the side of an ant. The rapidity of his walk heated his blood still more. The idea that he left behind him, exposed to a frightful vengeance, the woman he loved, or rather whom he adored as a saint, the emotion he had experienced, present fatigue, altogether exalted his mind above human feeling. He entered Portsmouth about 8 o'clock in the morning. The whole population was on foot. Drums were beating in the streets and in the port. The troops, about to embark, were marching toward the sea. Felton arrived at the palace of the Admiralty covered with dust and streaming with perspiration. His countenance, usually so pale, was purple with heat and passion. The sentinel wanted to repulse him, but Felton called to the officer of the post, and drawing from his pocket the letter of which he was the bearer, he said, "A pressing message from Lord de Winter." At the name of Lord de Winter, who was known to be one of his Grace's most intimate friends, the officer of the post gave orders to let Felton pass, who, besides, wore the uniform of a naval officer. Felton darted into the palace. At the moment he entered the vestibule, another man was entering likewise, dusty, out of breath, leaving at the gate a post-horse, which, on reaching the palace, tumbled on his foreknees. Felton and he addressed Patrick, the Duke's confidential lackey, at the same moment. Felton named Lord de Winter, the unknown would not name anybody, and pretended that it was to the Duke alone he would make himself known. Each was anxious to gain admission before the other. Patrick, who knew Lord de Winter was in affairs of the service and in relations of friendship with the Duke, gave the preference to the one who came in his name. The other was forced to wait, and it was easily to be seen how he cursed the delay. The valet led Felton through a large hall in which waited the deputies from La Rochelle, headed by the Prince de Soubise, and introduced him into a closet where Buckingham, just out of the bath, was finishing his toilet, upon which, as at all times, he bestowed extraordinary attention. "Lieutenant Felton, from Lord de Winter," said Patrick. "From Lord de Winter," repeated Buckingham. "Let him come in." Felton entered. At that moment Buckingham was throwing upon a couch a rich toilet robe, worked with gold, in order to put on a blue velvet doublet embroidered with pearls. "Why didn't the Baron come himself?" demanded Buckingham. "I expected him this morning." "He desired me to tell your Grace," replied Felton, "that he very much regretted not having that honour, but that he was prevented by the guard he is obliged to keep at the castle." "Yes, I know that," said Buckingham. "He has a prisoner." "It is of that prisoner that I wish to speak to your Grace," replied Felton. "Well, then, speak." "That which I have to say of her can only be heard by yourself, my lord." "Leave us, Patrick," said Buckingham, "but remain within sound of the bell. I shall call you presently." Patrick went out.
"We are alone, sir," said Buckingham. "Speak."
"My lord," said Felton, "the Baron de Winter wrote to you the other day to request you to sign an order of embarkation relative to a young woman named Charlotte Backson."
"Yes, sir, and I answered him to bring or send me that order, and I would sign it."
"Here it is, my lord."
"Give it to me," said the duke.
And taking it from Felton, he cast a rapid glance over the paper, and perceiving that it was the one that had been mentioned to him, he placed it on the table, took a pen, and prepared to sign it. "Pardon, my lord," said Felton, stopping the duke, "but does your grace know that the name of Charlotte Backson is not the true name of this young woman?"
"Yes, sir, I know it," replied the duke, dipping the quill in the ink.
"Then your grace knows her real name?" asked Felton in a sharp tone.
"I know it."
And the duke put the quill to the paper. Felton grew pale. "And knowing that real name, my lord," replied Felton, "will you sign it all the same?"
"Doubtless," said Buckingham, "or rather twice than once."
"I cannot believe," continued Felton, in a voice that became more sharp and rough, "that your grace knows that it is to Milady de Winter this relates."
"I know it perfectly, although I am astonished that you know it."
"And will your grace sign that order without remorse?"
Buckingham looked at the young man haughtily.
"Do you know, sir, that you are asking me very strange questions, and that I am very foolish to answer them?"
"Reply to them, my lord," said Felton. "The circumstances are more serious than you perhaps believe."
Buckingham reflected that the young man, coming from Lord de Winter, undoubtedly spoke in his name, and softened.
"Without remorse," said he. "The baron knows, as well as myself, that Milady de Winter is a very guilty woman, and it is treating her very favourably to commute her punishment to transportation."
The duke put his pen to the paper.
"You will not sign that order, my lord," said Felton, making a step toward the duke.
"I will not sign this order. And why not?"
"Because you will look into yourself, and you will do justice to the lady."
"I should do her justice by sending her to Tyburn," said Buckingham. "This lady is infamous."
"My lord, Milady de Winter is an angel. You know that she is, and I demand her liberty of you."
"Bah! Are you mad to talk to me thus?" said Buckingham.
"My lord, excuse me. I speak as I can. I restrain myself. But, my lord, think of what you're about to do, and beware of going too far."
"What do you say? God pardon me!" cried Buckingham. "I really think he threatens me."
"No, my lord, I still plead, and I say to you, one drop of water suffices to make the full vase overflow. One slight fault may draw down punishment upon the head spared, despite many crimes."
"Mr. Felton," said Buckingham, "you will withdraw, and place yourself at once under arrest."
"You will hear me to the end, my lord. You have seduced this young girl. You have outraged, defiled her. Repair your crimes toward her. Let her go free, and I will exact nothing else from you."
"You will exact,"
said Buckingham, looking at Felton with astonishment, and dwelling upon each syllable of the three words as he pronounced them.
"My lord,"
continued Felton, becoming more excited as he spoke,
"my lord, beware! All England is tired of your iniquities. My lord, you have abused the royal power, which you have almost usurped. My lord, you are held in horror by God and men. God will punish you hereafter, but I will punish you here."
"Ah, this is too much!"
cried Buckingham, making a step toward the door. Felton barred his passage.
"I ask it humbly of you, my lord," said he. "Sign the order for the liberation of Milady de Winter. Remember that she is a woman whom you have dishonoured."
"Withdraw, sir," said Buckingham, "or I will call my attendant and have you placed in irons."
"You shall not call," said Felton, throwing himself between the duke and the bell placed on a stand encrusted with silver. "Beware, my lord, you are in the hands of God." "In the hands of the devil, you mean," cried Buckingham, raising his voice so as to attract the notice of his people, without absolutely shouting. "Sign, my lord, sign the liberation of Milady de Winter," said Felton, holding out a paper to the duke. "By force? You are joking. Holloa, Patrick!" "Sign, my lord." "Never." "Never?" "Help!" shouted the duke, and at the same time he sprang toward his sword. But Felton did not give him time to draw it. He held the knife with which Milady had stabbed herself open in his bosom. At one bound he was upon the duke. At that moment Patrick entered the room, crying, "A letter from France, my lord." "From France!" cried Buckingham, forgetting everything and thinking from whom that letter came. Felton took advantage of this moment and plunged the knife into his side up to the handle. "Ah, traitor!" cried Buckingham. "You have killed me!" "Murder!" screamed Patrick. Felton cast his eyes round for means of escape, and seeing the door free, he rushed into the next chamber, in which, as we have said, the deputies from La Rochelle were waiting, crossed it as quickly as possible, and rushed toward the staircase. But upon the first step he met Lord de Winter, who, seeing him pale, confused, livid, and stained with blood both on his hands and face, seized him by the throat, crying, "I knew it! I guessed it! But too late by a minute! Unfortunate, unfortunate that I am!" Felton made no resistance. Lord de Winter placed him in the hands of the guards, who led him, while awaiting further orders, to a little terrace commanding the sea, and then the baron hastened to the duke's chamber. At the cry uttered by the duke and the scream of Patrick, the man whom Felton had met in the antechamber rushed into the chamber. He found the duke reclining upon a sofa, with his hand pressed upon the wound. "Laporte," said the duke, in a dying voice, "Laporte, do you come from her?" "Yes, monseigneur," replied the faithful cloak-bearer of Anne of Austria, "but too late, perhaps." "Silence, Laporte, you may be overheard. Patrick, let no one enter. Oh, I cannot tell what she says to me. My God, I am dying." And the duke swooned. Meanwhile, Lord de Winter, the deputies, the leaders of the expedition, the officers of Buckingham's household, had all made their way into the chamber. Cries of despair resounded on all sides. The news, which filled the palace with tears and groans, soon became known and spread itself throughout the city. The report of a cannon announced that something new and unexpected had taken place. Lord de Winter tore his hair. "Too late by a minute!" cried he. "Too late by a minute! Oh, my God, what a misfortune!" He had been informed at 7 o'clock in the morning that a rope ladder floated from one of the windows of the castle. He had hastened to Milady's chamber, had found it empty, the window open, and the bars filed, had remembered the verbal caution D'Artagnan had transmitted to him by his messenger, had trembled for the duke, and running to the stable without taking time to have a horse saddled, had jumped upon the first he found, had galloped off like the wind, had alighted below in the courtyard, had ascended the stairs precipitately, and on the top step, as we have said, had encountered Felton. The duke, however, was not dead. He recovered a little, reopened his eyes, and hope revived in all hearts. "Gentlemen," said he, "leave me alone with Patrick and Laporte. Ah, is that you, De Winter? You sent me a strange madman this morning. See the state in which he has put me." "Oh, my lord," cried the baron, "I shall never console myself." "And you would be quite wrong, my dear De Winter," said Buckingham, holding out his hand to him. "I do not know the man who deserves being regretted during the whole life of another man. But leave us, I pray you." The baron went out sobbing. There only remained in the closet of the wounded duke Laporte and Patrick. A physician was sought for, but none was yet found. "You will live, my lord, you will live," repeated the faithful servant of Anne of Austria, on his knees before the duke's sofa.
"What has she written to me?"
said Buckingham, feebly, streaming with blood, and suppressing his agony to speak of her he loved.
"What has she written to me? Read me her letter."
"Oh, my lord," said Laporte.
"Obey, Laporte. Do you not see I have no time to lose?"
Laporte broke the seal, and placed the paper before the eyes of the duke, but Buckingham in vain tried to make out the writing.
"Read," said he, "read. I cannot see. Read, then, for soon, perhaps, I shall not hear, and I shall die without knowing what she has written to me."
Laporte made no further objection, and read: "My lord, by that which, since I have known you, have suffered by you and for you, I conjure you, if you have any care for my repose, to countermand those great armaments which you are preparing against France, to put an end to a war of which it is publicly said religion is the ostensible cause, and of which, it is generally whispered, your love for me is the concealed cause. This war may not only bring great catastrophes upon England and France, but misfortune upon you, my lord, for which I should never console myself. Be careful of your life, which is menaced, and which will be dear to me from the moment I am not obliged to see an enemy in you. Your affectionate Anne." Buckingham collected all his remaining strength to listen to the reading of the letter. Then, when it was ended, as if he had met with a bitter disappointment, he asked,
"Have you nothing else to say to me by the living voice, Laporte?"
"The queen charged me to tell you to watch over yourself, for she had advice that your assassination would be attempted."
"And is that all? Is that all?"
replied Buckingham impatiently. "She likewise charged me to tell you that she still loved you."
"Ah," said Buckingham, "God be praised. My death, then, will not be to her as the death of a stranger."
Laporte burst into tears.
"Patrick," said the duke, "bring me the casket in which the diamond studs were kept."
Patrick brought the object desired, which Laporte recognized as having belonged to the queen.
"Now the scent bag of white satin, on which her cipher is embroidered in pearls."
Patrick again obeyed.
"Here, Laporte," said Buckingham. "These are the only tokens I ever received from her, this silver casket and these 2 letters. You will restore them to her majesty, and as a last memorial," he looked round for some valuable object, "you will add—"
He still sought, but his eyes, darkened by death, encountered only the knife which had fallen from the hand of Felton, still smoking with the blood spread over its blade.
"And you will add to them this knife,"
said the duke, pressing the hand of Laporte. He had just strength enough to place the scent bag at the bottom of the silver casket, and to let the knife fall into it, making a sign to Laporte that he was no longer able to speak. Then, in a last convulsion, which this time he had not the power to combat, he slipped from the sofa to the floor. Patrick uttered a loud cry. Buckingham tried to smile a last time, but death checked his thought, which remained engraved on his brow like a last kiss of love. At this moment the duke's surgeon arrived, quite terrified. He was already on board the admiral's ship, where they had been obliged to seek him. He approached the duke, took his hand, held it for an instant in his own, and letting it fall, "All is useless," said he. "He is dead." "Dead! Dead!" cried Patrick. At this cry all the crowd re-entered the apartment, and throughout the palace and town there was nothing but consternation and tumult. As soon as Lord de Winter saw Buckingham was dead, he ran to Felton, whom the soldier still guarded on the terrace of the palace. "Wretch!" said he to the young man, who since the death of Buckingham had regained that coolness and self-possession which never after abandoned him. "Wretch, what have you done?" "I have avenged myself," said he. "Avenged yourself!" said the baron. "Rather say that you have served as an instrument to that accursed woman. But I swear to you that this crime shall be her last." "I don't know what you mean," replied Felton quietly, "and I am ignorant of whom you are speaking, my lord. I killed the Duke of Buckingham because he twice refused you yourself to appoint me captain. I have punished him for his injustice, that is all." De Winter, stupefied, looked on while the soldiers bound Felton, and could not tell what to think of such insensibility. One thing alone, however, threw a shade over the pallid brow of Felton. At every noise he heard, the simple Puritan fancied he recognised the step and voice of Milady coming to throw herself into his arms, to accuse herself and die with him. All at once he started. His eyes became fixed upon a point of the sea, commanded by the terrace where he was. With the eagle glance of a sailor he had recognised there, where another would have seen only a gull hovering over the waves, the sail of a sloop which was directed toward the coast of France. He grew deadly pale, placed his hand upon his heart, which was breaking, and at once perceived all the treachery. "One last favour, my lord," said he to the baron. "What?" asked his lordship. "What o'clock is it?" The baron drew out his watch. "It wants 10 minutes to 9," said he. Milady had hastened her departure by an hour and a half. As soon as she heard the cannon which announced the fatal event, she had ordered the anchor to be weighed. The vessel was making way under a blue sky at great distance from the coast. "God has so willed it," said he, with the resignation of a fanatic, but without, however, being able to take his eyes from that ship, on board of which he doubtless fancied he could distinguish the white outline of her to whom he had sacrificed his life. De Winter followed his look, observed his feelings, and guessed all. "Be punished alone for the first, miserable man," said Lord de Winter to Felton, who was being dragged away with his eyes turned toward the sea. "But I swear to you, by the memory of my brother whom I have loved so much, that your accomplice is not saved." Felton lowered his head without pronouncing a syllable. As to Lord de Winter, he descended the stairs rapidly and went straight to the port. End of chapter. Chapter 60 of The Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 60. In France. The first fear of the King of England, Charles I, on learning of the death of the Duke, was that such terrible news might discourage the Rochellais. He tried, says Richelieu in his Memoirs, to conceal it from them as long as possible, closing all the ports of his kingdom, and carefully keeping watch that no vessel should sail until the army which Buckingham was getting together had gone, taking upon himself, in default of Buckingham, to superintend the departure. He carried the strictness of this order so far as to detain in England the ambassadors of Denmark, who had taken their leave, and the regular ambassador of Holland, who was to take back to the port of Flushing the India merchantmen of which Charles I had made restitution to the United Provinces. But as he did not think of giving this order till 5 hours after the event, that is to say, till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 vessels had already left the port, the one bearing, as we know, Milady, who, already anticipating the event, was further confirmed in that belief by seeing the black flag flying at the masthead of the admiral's ship. As to the second vessel, we will tell hereafter whom it carried and how it set sail. During this time, nothing new occurred in the camp at La Rochelle. Only the king, who was bored, as always, but perhaps a little more so in camp than elsewhere, resolved to go incognito and spend the festival of St. Louis at Saint Germain, and asked the cardinal to order him an escort of only 20 musketeers. The cardinal, who sometimes became weary of the king, granted this leave of absence with great pleasure to his royal lieutenant, who promised to return about the 15th of September. Monsieur de Tréville, being informed of this by his Eminence, packed his portmanteau, and as without knowing the cause he knew the great desire and even imperative need which his friends had of returning to Paris, it goes without saying that he fixed upon them to form part of the escort. The 4 young men heard the news a quarter of an hour after Monsieur de Tréville, for they were the first to whom he communicated it. It was then that D'Artagnan appreciated the favour the cardinal had conferred upon him in making him at last enter the Musketeers, for without that circumstance he would have been forced to remain in the camp while his companions left it. It goes without saying that this impatience to return toward Paris had for a cause the danger which Madame Bonacieux would run of meeting at the convent of Bethune with Milady, her mortal enemy. Aramis, therefore, had written immediately to Marie Michon, the seamstress at Tours, who had such fine acquaintances, to obtain from the queen authority for Madame Bonacieux to leave the convent, and to retire either into Lorraine or Belgium. They had not long to wait for an answer. 8 or 10 days afterward, Aramis received the following letter. My dear cousin, here is the authorization from my sister to withdraw our little servant from the convent of Bethune, the air of which you think is bad for her. My sister sends you this authorization with great pleasure, for she is very partial to the little girl, to whom she intends to be more serviceable hereafter. I salute you, Marie Michon. To this letter was added an order conceived in these terms. At the Louvre, August 10th, 1628. The superior of the convent of Bethune will place in the hands of the person who shall present this note to her the novice who entered the convent upon my recommendation and under my patronage. Anne. It may be easily imagined how the relationship between Aramis and a seamstress who called the queen her sister amused the young men. But Aramis, after having blushed 2 or 3 times up to the whites of his eyes at the gross pleasantry of Porthos, begged his friends not to revert to the subject again, declaring that if a single word more was said to him about it, he would never again implore his cousins to interfere in such affairs. There was no further question, therefore, about Marie Michon among the 4 Musketeers, who besides had what they wanted, that was, the order to withdraw Madame Bonacieux from the convent of the Carmelites at Bethune. It was true that this order would not be of great use to them while they were in camp at La Rochelle, that is to say, at the other end of France. Therefore D'Artagnan was going to ask leave of absence of Monsieur de Tréville, confiding to him candidly the importance of his departure, when the news was transmitted to him, as well as his 3 friends, that the king was about to set out for Paris with an escort of 20 musketeers, and that they formed part of the escort. Their joy was great. The lackeys were sent on before with the baggage, and they set out on the morning of the 16th. The cardinal accompanied his majesty from Surgères to Meuse, and there the king and his minister took leave of each other with great demonstrations of friendship. The king, however, who sought distraction, while travelling as fast as possible, for he was anxious to be in Paris by the 23rd, stopped from time to time to fly the magpie, a pastime for which the taste had been formerly inspired in him by de Lune, and for which he had always preserved a great predilection. Out of the 20 musketeers, 16, when this took place, rejoiced greatly at this relaxation, but the other 4 cursed it heartily. D'Artagnan, in particular, had a perpetual buzzing in his ears, which Porthos explained thus: "A very great lady has told me that this means that somebody is talking of you somewhere." At length the escort passed through Paris on the 23rd, in the night. The king thanked Monsieur de Tréville and permitted him to distribute furloughs for 4 days, on condition that the favoured party should not appear in any public place under penalty of the Bastille. The first 4 furloughs granted, as may be imagined, were to our 4 friends. Still further, Athos obtained of Monsieur de Tréville 6 days instead of 4, and introduced into these 6 days 2 more nights, for they set out on the 24th at 5 o'clock in the evening, and as a further kindness, Monsieur de Tréville post-dated the leave to the morning of the 25th. "Good Lord!" said D'Artagnan, who, as we have often said, never stumbled at anything. "It appears to me that we are making a great trouble of a very simple thing. In 2 days, and by using up 2 or 3 horses, that's nothing, I have plenty of money, I am at Bethune. I present my letter from the Queen to the superior, and I bring back the dear treasure I go to seek, not into Lorraine, not into Belgium, but to Paris, where she will be much better concealed, particularly while the cardinal is at La Rochelle. Well, once returned from the country, half by the protection of her cousin, half through what we have personally done for her, we shall obtain from the Queen what we desire. Remain, then, where you are, and do not exhaust yourself with useless fatigue. Myself and Planchet are all that such a simple expedition requires." To this Athos replied quietly, "We also have money left, for I have not yet drunk all my share of the diamond, and Porthos and Aramis have not eaten all theirs. We can therefore use up 4 horses as well as 1. But consider, D'Artagnan," added he, in a tone so solemn that it made the young man shudder, "consider that Bethune is a city where the cardinal has given rendezvous to a woman who, wherever she goes, brings misery with her. If you had only to deal with 4 men, D'Artagnan, I would allow you to go alone. You have to do with that woman. We 4 will go, and I hope to God that with our 4 lackeys we may be in sufficient number." "You terrify me, Athos," cried D'Artagnan. "My God, what do you fear?" "Everything," replied Athos. D'Artagnan examined the countenances of his companions, which, like that of Athos, wore an impression of deep anxiety, and they continued their route as fast as their horses could carry them, but without adding another word. On the evening of the 25th, as they were entering Arras, and as D'Artagnan was dismounting at the inn of the Golden Harrow to drink a glass of wine, a horseman came out of the post-yard, where he had just had a relay, started off at a gallop, and with a fresh horse took the road to Paris. At the moment he passed through the gateway into the street, the wind blew open the cloak in which he was wrapped, although it was in the month of August, and lifted his hat, which the traveller seized with his hand the moment it had left his head, pulling it eagerly over his eyes. D'Artagnan, who had his eyes fixed upon this man, became very pale and let his glass fall. "What is the matter, monsieur?" said Planchet. "Oh, come, gentlemen, my master is ill." The 3 friends hastened toward D'Artagnan, who, instead of being ill, ran toward his horse. They stopped him at the door. "Well, where the devil are you going now?" cried Athos. "It is he!" cried D'Artagnan, pale with anger and with the sweat on his brow. "It is he! Let me overtake him!" "He? What he?" asked Athos. "He, that man!" "What man?" "That cursed man, my evil genius, whom I have always met with when threatened by some misfortune. He who accompanied that horrible woman when I met her for the first time. He who I was seeking when I offended our Athos. He whom I saw on the very morning Madame Bonacieux was abducted. I have seen him, that is he. I recognized him when the wind blew upon his cloak." "The devil!" said Athos musingly. "To saddle, gentlemen, to saddle! Let us pursue him, and we shall overtake him." "My dear friend," said Aramis, "remember that he goes in an opposite direction from that in which we are going, that he has a fresh horse and ours are fatigued, and that we shall disable our own horses without even a chance of overtaking him. Let the man go, D'Artagnan. Let us save the woman."
Monsieur," cried a hostler, running out and looking after the stranger. "Monsieur, here is a paper which dropped out of your hat. Eh, monsieur, eh!"
friend," said D'Artagnan, "a half pistole for that paper."
"My faith, monsieur, with great pleasure. Here it is."
The hostler, enchanted with the good day's work he had done, returned to the yard. D'Artagnan unfolded the paper. "Well?" eagerly demanded all his three friends.
"Nothing but one word," said D'Artagnan.
"Yes," said Aramis, "but that one word is the name of some town or village."
"Armentières," read Porthos. "Armentières? I don't know such a place."
"And that name of a town or village is written in her hand," cried Athos.
Come on,"
said D'Artagnan. "Let us keep that paper carefully. Perhaps I have not thrown away my half pistole. To horse, my friends, to horse!" And the four friends flew at a gallop along the road to Bethune. End of chapter.